upstairs.
You think you have tons in
It's
your
in her
first
first
day?
aid kit.
Yeah.
We're a thin
I think that would be a little odd.
It would
No,
be.
I
can see
It's in
it.
there.
I don't think there's
I'm
I've
looking at
never
it,
seen that.
I'm like, look at this thing. It's got everything in it.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
I thought we had some peppermint tea too, but we don't.
Oh, here, I have some.
Because chai tea isn't doing it. It wasn't a smart
I
idea.
have peppermint. I carry it with me because we don't.
Okay, thank you.
I have some tea. Maybe that'll help.
High five went wrong. And,
It's way wrong.
I should have let it go. And, the high five went out of my way, and it was foolish. You're getting me a new one, but
At least it's a work site. As long as you can read it.
thank God, yes. And it is works, so covering it too, which is kind of nice also, yeah. You ever had a phone ring during the meeting? While the ringing up? Without it being on
Not me,
vibrate?
but other members have.
I probably a matter of time before I forget.
Yeah, speaking of that, I should make sure mine's on silent.
Good evening.
Would you like to? I'll pass this on to you, but it's a popular word about city.
Sure. What I can do is I can scan it.
Scan it and put it into the news.
Yep, I'll scan it, put it in the newsletter. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not blind. Why am I? See this now?
Sorry, Jack. They had some peppermint tea in
You can still get her Tums.
No, she wants me to go home and get my tongue so that she could go home. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's City Council study session. And our first agenda item is emergency management discussion. Assistant City Manager Mark Woulf is here to discuss emergency management with us. Hello. Good evening, Mr. Woulf.
I'm going to have a couple friends join me again. Margaret Brocklander is back.
Hi. All right.
All right, so this evening we're going to provide you a little bit more information around emergency management. I know several questions were asked in follow-up from our first conversation 2 weeks ago related to a couple different options for how to handle emergency management in the city. We did as much as we could in the 2-week time frame to try to, really like 10 days, to provide you information related to a little more detail on what you get for each option. We are still researching at least some details with a potential arrangement with Arapahoe County that Commander Engler can speak to. But pretty much what we discussed last time is about the same. We've refined some of the potential costs and wanted to give you a little bit more detail on those. And feel free to chime in at any time. So just a quick reminder on the two options that we were discussing. And I think in your packets I included last week's presentation as well, so if you need to go back and refer to it, feel free to do that. Option one is described 2 weeks ago as the arrangement with Arapahoe County, approximately $60,000 subject to negotiation. We've reached out to the county to refine that scope a bit that presented us a while back. Our best estimate is that we could probably negotiate that down, though it just is subject to what we actually want to get out of the agreement. And I'll explain a little bit that it may not necessarily just be a fixed cost, that there could be some variable cost depending on how much training we need for staff, and we perhaps want for the business community and others, but we can get into that in a moment. And then option two is the on-staff option, in-house emergency manager. That comes with a range. That's how our salary studies are done, spits us back out comps across the region. So based on position description that we gave to Human Resources, be in the ballpark of $70,000 to $100,000 for salary. Based on experience and qualifications, our best guess is that we would aim to hire within the $75,000, $85,000 range. But of course, that could vary widely on experience and qualifications. But that would be our target. So ideally, we'd be in that range.
Can we have questions or comments
Sure.
as we're going?
Absolutely.
My one question on this salary range, we also have benefits, so probably would double the amount of what the salary range is going to be?
It's about 30%. So if you imagine 1.3 times the salary number is what typically city benefits run.
Okay, thank
So
you.
that is a good point. It is not just the salary expenses. It would include benefits, and that would be ongoing over time.
So the amount is 100 to 115?
I will trust your quick math on that one.
Would there be vehicles or any other things going on with us?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. We do have some pool vehicles available that we could probably move around. Our fleet manager has done a really good job in making sure we're sharing resources when necessary. So we don't anticipate it at this time, but perhaps we could look at sharing a vehicle. All right. One of the questions that came out last week is who else is doing this across the region. There are several cities we listed, perhaps not a comprehensive list, but several in the region that do have an in-house emergency manager. Others in Arapahoe County do utilize Arapahoe County for their services. We discussed 2 weeks ago Sheridan's arrangement. They do have somewhat in-house. It's done by their police chief, and they go with Arapahoe County for anything above and beyond the capacity of their police department. Littleton comes with a caveat. We explained that last week, that they do currently have an in-house emergency manager. However, I believe that function is under their fire department. So as they move those services over to South Metro, they still have to make a decision on what to do.
If they move them over to South Metro, but that's not till January 1st. So when you say in-house, is that somebody, just an employee that's with the city right now is doing that function of it? Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
To highlight some of the benefits of option one, the agreement with the county, emergency operations plan. So obviously that would be one of the top priorities, is bringing forth a document for council to adopt related to our spending and our general operations plan. Support for our EOC, planning for the EOC, essential staffing if and when we do need to trigger the EOC, general emergency response support, information, situational awareness, some of the training. We're going to get a little bit more into the training in a moment, and some of these other functions such as mutual aid. And these are functions that are available in large disasters. I think the important thing, and if you think through various different scenarios, if it's a large disaster that has countywide impact, typically we'll be relying on the county no matter what, so that we can access funding as the chain goes up. First you go through the county, then through the state, and then through the feds to access funding. So in a larger situation, this type of support would be there anyway. This is to say that in any type of emergency situation where we declared an emergency, the county would provide these services. And then looking at option two, it's a little bit hard to see on the slide on the wall, but in red are the functions of an in-house emergency manager that are above and beyond those provided by the county. So one of the main functions is this whole idea of preparedness and mitigation, so the proactive side of emergency management and emergency planning. So really analyzing our local environment and determining where we're most at risk and trying to plan for and mitigate those disasters. Looking at other local planning efforts, especially with our business community, outreach to residents, information as to how to respond, how the city will respond, what to expect in terms of services, and for businesses, how to access emergency resources, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously some type of local control over the response. It depends on the incident. So larger the incident, more likely we're going to rely on the county or the state. However, there are a number of different local issues that you can think through. If you think of local demonstrations that who knows, walk down Hamden, block traffic, and we decide to trigger the EOC, that's very localized, and so we would have much more ability to plan for and control over that situation, and perhaps a little quicker response.
If it's Hampton or Santa Fe, aren't those state highways, and therefore the state would have jurisdiction if Hampton was blocked or Santa Fe? Sure.
Maybe a better example is going down Broadway. I think the point is that in the event that you have some type of protest or something happens here at the local level that has some type of large community response and it's fairly localized, that we'd be on our own. And I think the degree that we can plan for that and not rely on a larger response from the county, the better. In some of those scenarios, just having us in the position to be able to respond quickly would be very helpful, not to put additional pressure on the police department to respond to the incident and also coordinate emergency response would be helpful. So it certainly depends on the type of incident, but I think having that type of local control in the various different scenarios that could come up that would be fairly localized, it would be helpful. And a focus on staff training. So this slide, or part of this slide, was provided last time. So these are the various components of what is required under FEMA to access funding, but also best practice in emergency planning and management. These type of trainings would be provided by the county, but that's the type of variability that there may be in a contract with the county. So some of this may be provided up front, especially to city staff, management staff. But past that, in the ongoing support, any type of community activities, those types of things that go above and beyond the standard staff level training would most likely be a la carte. So we'd have to pay for those types of trainings through the county above and beyond that. And a little bit more information on elements of community preparedness. I think the big bullet points were provided to you last time. Types of things that an emergency manager could provide in-house and do a little bit more, spend a little bit more of their staff time working on than we would get from the county is outreach to the business community, what to do in an emergency, what is the city's response once we do have updated plans, how does this relate to your business operations, what types of service can you expect from the city, and generally kind of that idea of preparedness. Education and training to residents, we're maybe not a door-to-door visit and say how could you personally prepare for disaster, but I think talking through, having workshops and discussing best practices, again talking about this idea of risk, what are we at most risk for, what are some of the things that we're seeing, how can you protect yourself against those types of events are all things that we could provide to the community. And again, some of that outreach to business, the business community could be provided by the county, but I think that would be, at least our understanding, is would be above and beyond an initial scope of service. And this slide was provided last time in some of the historical challenges in providing emergency management services. We did review again. It had been a few months since we looked at grant opportunities, but unfortunately, at this point, we don't believe there is a clear fit for funding an emergency manager through a grant at this time. Not to say there won't be future grant opportunities to help supplement, maybe not the salary, as anybody knows that goes after grant opportunities. Getting staff time through grants is really difficult, but perhaps with some of our outreach to the community and developing some of our plans, we'll certainly be diligent in looking for those grant opportunities. All right, that's the conclusion of the updated information. Perhaps at this time it'd be helpful to answer any additional questions that you may have, and feel free to use the expertise at the table.
Are there any questions or comments from council? Councilmember Olson.
Thank you. I did want to go back to the in-house emergency managers and what that means in some of these cities. Are these people who already have another job and this is added on, Are there any that are full-time, permanent, that this is their only job? Do we have any example, like job descriptions for those? Am I loud enough?
No, you probably need to move the mic a little closer.
So I was tasked with this question. And I reached out to the emergency manager in Brighton and asked for a list of cities that have emergency managers full-time on staff. And this was the list that was provided to me.
Oh. The one here, Brighton, Thornton, Westminster,
Yes.
all of these are full-time.
They have
people, not
full-time
added
emergency,
on to-
a lot of them have multiple emergency managers on staff. The larger cities, Thornton, Westminster, Broomfield, Boulder, they have multiple. Smaller cities, Brighton, they have one.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
And we talked a bit about this last time, but the location of those varies. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's a function of the fire department, sometimes it's within the police department. I think some, maybe even public works.
You mean who supervises?
Who supervises what department they're
that's-
ultimately housed in. Probably at this point, and I think City Manager Keck spoke to this last time, not that the city manager's office wants to bulk up our staff by any means, but having that person be able to cross multiple departments and have the authority to cross multiple departments and really help at a cross-departmental purpose, I think would be really helpful. But certainly there's different structures out there.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Martinez.
Thanks for this additional information. It was helpful to see what other cities have a full-time staff related to this, and so thanks for gathering that. I'm still in favor of option 2. I think it's the smartest for us to have our in-house for many reasons. One, the staff training time. It's not like a one-time training. I'm sure whoever's in this role is going to be working with all of our departments continually as things progress and change, and so I think for that reason it's really important, and also for the community preparedness piece of that. I think our community would really benefit from knowing that we're actively looking at what we would do in a situation like this, and knowing they would feel more comfortable knowing that we have it under control and we have a plan no matter what happens. So for those 2 reasons, I prefer option 2.
Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I believe this is the first scenario in which I have been involved where there might be a potential new employee hired. It sounds like a full-time employee. So what would be the scenario from here? This would go before council, and we would vote on either option 1 or 2, and then depending upon that, you guys would move forward with potentially that hire of a full-time employee.
Right. So ideally, we'd get a sense of consensus this evening, and instead of tossing both options to you, we'd bring forth the implementation of whatever option was preferred tonight. So if that's option 1, the county agreement, then we would work with the county and present an IGA most likely with the associated contract for council approval. So that's option 1. For option 2, we would be bringing forth most likely a budget amendment or transfer if we're able to swing that for the funding for the position. And then on the administration side, we would post the position and hire it from there.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, we are down 1 member this evening, but is the expectation that we will try and reach consensus on this evening?
This is for information and direction. I would like to discuss this a little bit more before we move on to consensus. I actually called my brother-in-law who worked for Homeland Security and was worked with large counties. He was in D.C. a lot and prepared for emergencies, and just asked him questions. And I mean, he gave me a lot of questions. He said, assuming that you are going to have local control, he said, these are probably some of the questions that we ought to ask ourselves. He said, having local control, the benefit of that is having the person is more intimately familiar with the city. But he said the questions to ask, do we have excessive truck traffic within the city with hazardous waste? Are there industries in town that could pose a hazard? He said, of course, the wastewater treatment plant within the city limit could present a huge leak hazardous situation. What about potential targets of interest, like a bus station, like Denver, like the train station, an airport, large items? And he said, of course, schools and shopping malls are also potential targets. And so those were some of the things that he brought up that, and then he said there's other questions that you ask regarding the census of people. How many people sleep in the town and how many people work here? And he said since we do not have huge industry, we probably don't have large populations of people working here. So the population is probably greater at night than it is in the daytime.
No. It's not. We have a lot of jobs here.
We have a lot of jobs? Oh, that's right. Okay, the hospital. Yes. Yes. Okay. So, but these were just some of the things that he suggested. And he said probably because we don't have our own fire department, we have another situation. And I mean, I think it came up 2 weeks ago that Denver, since they're a different city and county, we wouldn't have that person here. But obviously, they are providing fire service for us now. And a lot of these things, like if there was a hazardous waste or hazardous spill or something like that, we're going to have the help of the fire department. So we probably need to get Denver, what is their commitment to us? I don't know if that was covered in our contract. Okay. So they would be helping us. And I think another thing, and maybe this is already on the table, well, you already shared this tonight. How confident are we in the county's ability to coordinate with us and with other counties that we'll be involved with? So those are just some of the things that he brought up in my conversation with him. So
I think those are really helpful questions. And overall, I think what a number of those questions get at is what is the overall acceptable level of risk for us? Mm-hmm. And so, I think we're comfortable with the way the county would manage it in the event of an emergency. I think there are some types of emergencies where a more nimble, more localized, somebody more intimately familiar with Englewood would be more helpful than the county. But that being said, that's less costly, certainly, than having an in-house staff person. But with that, maybe raises our level of risk in those other types of situations. So I think it's a matter of, and the decision for the council ultimately is what is that acceptable level of risk.
And I think also, how confident are we that this will be a full-time position, once the plan is established? I mean, that's another question. Councilmember Barentine.
Well, no. Through the years, I mean, we've gotten a radio system ever since Columbine happened to get the radio system.
Is your mic on?
Sorry about that.
It looks like it died. I'll take that.
Oh, her other one.
Since Columbine happened, I mean, we did put money in to make sure that all of the different entities could communicate with each other, that all the different police departments and fire departments can communicate with each other. And some plans were done at that time for how you would, in an emergency, go ahead and do some, where you would take people, how Swedish would respond, whether, you'd send them to Porter or to Littleton or how all of that works. So since there's already, for each one of those agencies or entities that you're talking about, I think there's a requirement with them to have certain plans in place already, and they already have certain models in place that they're working with the county on, and I don't think we'd want to reinvent the wheel on that. So I really would like to get more information on whether having a full-time person to the mayor's question is, if we go ahead and institute this, is it really a sustainable full-time job after that, putting those in place, and how much we already have in place, but it might just be in pieces that we really don't have control over. I mean, in certain emergency situations, the county has control, like over the police, or they actually, can coordinate what's going on depending on what's happening too. So I think we'd need to have a kind of tiered understanding of what the authority of anybody that we put in would be able to do. If it's just in our community, that's one thing. And what are the potential issues that we would deal with that would actually just be contained within the city of Englewood that would warrant this? And then what kind of role they would play as it escalated into any kind of expanding issues. I mean, they had a chemical spill on Santa Fe. They've had 2 times when the train derailed over there in Littleton, over there by the light rail. So, and then you've got different entities that are already, even though it was contained within Littleton, you have several different entities that were involved just because it was on the it was on the tracks. So it was actually on the railroad tracks and involved the light rail. So you have all these other entities that are kind of coming in too. So I am concerned that we would be setting something up that wasn't a sustainable full-time position. And a little bit more, all of these entities that were listed are hugely different. I mean, Aurora is 300,000 people. Littleton is 41,000, or like 35,000. So I believe that the job description obviously would be really different for each one of these, and I would like to see a little bit more of that type of information. I'm not sure that they're all individual, that's their only sole position at this time, but it would be nice to get a little bit more information on what the job description looks like for each one of these entities, and certainly a couple that are closer to us, and how Sheridan is handling it since they have Denver Fire as well. I can only imagine that if something happened, Denver would take precedence, and it would be, it's concerning. Even if it's in the contract, when it hits the fan, are they going to look at us and make us a priority, or is it going to be Denver? And I just want to, have a little bit more understanding how that looks for Sheridan and how they're working that out.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Councilmember Cuesta.
I think that those are good points raised, and that kind of alluded to my question regarding a new staff member. Do we see what that job description would look like before we vote, or is that drafted after we would designate option 2 if we went that direction would be the preference?
Typically, Councilmember, we would have a job description in mind and already prepared. I believe that's what's happened here because we had to grade the position to see what it would be compensated. And again, typically, council doesn't review job descriptions that's more an administrative function. However, I mean, we're happy to share that with the council. We're trying to hide anything in that. I think that if you'd like to see a job description, we can provide that to you. This job description that we've been kicking around and looking at is modeled after many of the entities that Ms. Brocklander brought forward tonight. Duties are similar, it's just the scale and scope, right? Scale and scope of the organizations in the cities. So if you want to see that, that's certainly something that we can provide to you so you can examine that. And
I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. And, one way or another, option 1 or option 2, I think would be better than what we currently have. There's certainly important information to still gain, but I'd prefer not to spend too much time on this. Hopefully we can just get a consensus one way or the other. And thank you for the job description.
Mm-hmm.
And Councilmember Olson.
I think I'm hesitant on giving consensus tonight only because I would like to see if there's any other positions that you think we need to add given the next year's budget to see what we're deciding about. If I were to my best choice here would be absolutely 2. We want to have control. We want to make sure it's done our way, and we have our own uniqueness, and Englewood does have its own uniqueness. We're not Sheridan, even though we have some similar things with fire. So there's other things that so I would definitely say 2 would be my preference, but I don't know what we're comparing our budget expansions with in terms of jobs. So if you know of any others, I wouldn't want to make a decision on this and then find out, in 2 or 3 weeks that there's another one coming that and maybe police wants something or something like that, and we all of a sudden we haven't weighed things out together. That would be my holdback tonight. A job description would certainly be useful. It would be really nice to see a job description where it's a job that is devoted totally to this, and then perhaps where it's on top of someone else's job. I don't know if you have any like that. If none of these are, then that probably doesn't make sense. But you said some of these cities have several people and parts to each. Does that mean then one person oversees all of them? That's their devoted job?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's really grown then, hasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, that's up. Well, then forget that. Don't worry about it. That doesn't exist, it sounds like. But, I think for me, probably the more important part of it is just to make sure that we're not robbing one area for another and creating a new job.
I actually think that is a very good suggestion. Thank you. And I think also one thing that also would be very helpful for us is getting the piece from Arapahoe County so we know exactly what they would be able to provide for us and how that might work together with what we already have.
I received an update from them today. Lieutenant Fogg was in training for 2 weeks, and so he couldn't get it to me until today. We can provide that to you, but we didn't have it near enough time to get it into your packet for tonight.
Okay.
It's very similar to the last scope of work, although it goes down into a little bit more detail. And I specifically asked him if the pricing was the same as the first scope, and he said he couldn't tell me at this point. He was guessing it would be very similar. So I couldn't pin him down on any kind of pricing, but there is a more detailed scope that we can send to you as well.
Okay, so on the more detailed scope, did they give you any better idea, or?
It details out some things about the emergency operations plan, about the training. It's still a little light in any kind of business or citizen training. At one point it does mention involving key business stakeholders, but that's a lot different than actually any kind of training that would lead to any mitigation prior to an event.
Okay.
Most likely that would be more coordination with the hospitals, for instance.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
I'm sure it's pretty easily available if we could get the copy of the section of the IGA that has our agreement with Denver on what they've committed to, and then if we could at least get the communities that are closest in size to us, or some kind of, or all of them. I mean, there's only 1, 2, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's only 13 of them, but if you could at least do like half of them or something, and just provide the job description. I'm sure that's very readily available. So if they're in-house and they're full-time, then we can see if there's any differences or comparisons, or maybe they're all the same. I don't know, but it would be nice to see that information.
And is the salary information available? Is that public record for
these other cities?
Yeah, for the other entities.
Some of them we have to, basically the process for our Human Resources Department is when we have a job description that we'd like to move forward on, we give that to Human Resources and they do a salary survey. So they go to each other city that has an emergency manager with a similar position description, gets their salary information, looks at the metro area and says this is the range of salaries that we would be competitive within and fits within our own our compensation plan. So that 69 to 101 number was based off of that. So that is the process that we follow, but we could certainly provide the salary information from other cities.
Okay.
Because it is available. If you're paid by taxpayer dollars, it's
all right.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Let's move on to agenda item 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commander Englert and Ms. Rocklander. Moving on to Agenda Item 2, Council Policy Manual discussion. We're moving on with Assistant Manager, City Manager Mark Woulf. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right. We continue the Council Policy Manual saga. Perhaps the last
You can liberally use that.
evening, knock on wood. We don't have too many items to get through, so all of these this evening will be items that were requested for additional discussion, and so I've tried to tee those up as best as possible, and we can end this evening with a discussion over if there's any other individual items that you all would like to revisit, or how you would like a final draft to come forward to you. And as a reminder, different than the procedure manual, where this would simply just need to be adopted by motion at a regular meeting instead of a formal ordinance. All right. So starting with off-agenda items, so this was requested to come back. I just slapped in the entire suggested policy that is in your current draft manual. We did discuss this before, and I think there was some general consensus over how to handle it. I think one of the issues that was raised since then was what to do or how to define noted on the agenda. What does noted on the agenda mean? For instance, if a member of the public comes and in advance says, I want to speak on communications, and communications is noted on your agenda, and we end up discussing a special event, which is technically under communications. And because that member of the public has raised that issue under communications, is that specific enough for you all to engage in a policy discussion about the special event that the person was talking about and reach some type of consensus or direct the city manager to change a policy? So I think that needs some fleshing out. Is that section of the agenda, can a member of the public request a specific topic, and then that constitutes allowing a discussion? I think the concern is always, and I know we discussed this a while back, is that if the general public does not have a clear understanding of what policy issue is under consideration for the council, then you run into some gray area with the open meetings law. And so I think it's just a matter of clearly establishing for you all what constitutes being noted on the agenda and what doesn't, so that you're setting the expectation for the community going forward. It's just whatever line you set. So yeah, I don't really think, based on our policy, I don't think that's on the agenda this evening. So under council member choice, I'm going to bring it up and place it on the next study session, or place it on the next regular meeting. So it's just a matter of clarifying for you all, so you know exactly in what situation you'll be following that procedure, and allow the community to understand that as well.
So one of my questions is sometimes, and I mean a lot of times, the public just comes with issues that are currently going on, and I think what policy issues are different. I mean, so if it's only policy issue, and I know that there was some concern about responding to issues that the public bring up. So I don't want to silence the public either. Do you have any examples, or do we have any examples from the past of how we have violated that?
One of the suggestions, and I hate to use this example because it seems to pick at a scab, not my intention, is that there was discussion around a policy related to, I believe this came up under a telephonic participation, and what happened in that instance is that there was a discussion essentially, and a motion was made, and this happened in a couple of different settings, where the council essentially made a policy change without that policy change specifically being noted on the agenda. Okay. So to use a radically different example, the recent conversations about homelessness and kind of what is our community response to it. So I think that's a situation where you all said, you know what, we need to have a study session about this. We can't sit up here and decide policy based on we know the community is concerned about this. This is an issue. Everybody's raised it. We've had this nice forum, but we need to have a discussion on council. I think that's basic. I'm summarizing a lot of discussion in a couple sentences. But that type of thing is exactly what this policy says, is that community can come and express their concerns about anything they want, absolutely. And the council can ask questions and make sure they understand the issue that's being presented. But then to say, well, what are we going to do with this? That you're not doing that on the fly, that you're setting an expectation, setting a clear notice on a future agenda when you'll be taking up that particular issue.
Okay, so, and this is the reason I wanted clarification on this, is because allowing response to public comment among council members, I haven't necessarily seen in the response to public comment that we have violated this. I might be wrong, and I'm open for input. Councilmember Olson.
I think we have come very close. I'm sure our city attorney would stop us if we were totally violated. But I've had people who come to the meetings and told me, oh my goodness, I did not know homelessness was on the agenda. And yet, it wasn't. But that is what the dominant public conversation was. And sometimes we go way too far in commenting about it to the point where it looks like it's now an agenda issue. And that's why I moved it to study sessions. I thought this is getting really close to being really unhelpful, because I don't want to say what I would like to say because it's not an agenda item. Same with the sexual offender distancing. I think it happened. I think with the sludge with the water thing, there were things said until the point where we couldn't talk about it, or we decided to abide by a different rule. I think it's way too. I think public can say whatever they want. It's what we do with it that I think borders sometimes. And I think we've encouraged over the last several years more and more people coming and getting us to engage around topics that are not on our agenda. I think it's questionable.
Okay, and not necessarily that they're coming to speak about those topics,
no,
but
that we take them up and we go for an hour, because of all the comments we make one by one by one.
Okay.
And even in the questions, we sometimes are drawn in. It hasn't happened all the time, but it does. I'm uncomfortable with it, very uncomfortable with it.
Okay, but I'm also uncomfortable with silencing the public also.
Did you hear me say I
No,
want to silence the public?
you did.
Okay, that
no.
comes up over and over, and I
well,
prefer
no, but
that
there
be
is
the rhetoric we use for it.
Okay, are you there?
Yeah, I am. That
right.
is what I really don't want us to keep saying, though, because it's not what I'm talking about. It's not what anybody's talking about.
Okay, and I appreciate that. But I also would like to respond to that is I just want to be careful that it's not perceived that we cannot respond at all either. So that's just my opinion. Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
And I think, Councilmember Olson, when you include that by us making any comment or them getting any feedback, that we're encouraging them to come is kind of tough on the public. I don't think council encourages the public to come. I think the public ends up coming frustrated on some issues when they don't believe that the city is being responsive to them or that they're getting an answer to it. And I don't know that it would be made better if people reach that level of frustration to try to come to council because they believe that that's the only avenue or voice they have, that we sit up there stoic, unable to go ahead and make sure that we let them feel that they've been heard. So it is not, I think it's been, I think there has been a narrative and some rhetoric out there that's as if public comes at the behest or encouragement of any council instead of that they actually have issues and problems and they've reached some level of frustration and they're trying to get it resolved. So, and I think that's unfair to the people that spend the time or have an issue that is of such importance to them, that is their avenue if they don't feel that they're being heard. So I think that the attempt to go ahead and say we want to have this be more like we should do a study session. I agree with that piece of it, that we should kind of formalize it so that if we say we've got this issue coming forward. It's obvious that the community has some interest in this that maybe we weren't aware of, or that it's boiled up, or there's some frustration going on, that we could take care of that. But I think when it's shall not respond to community, kind of makes it feel as if we've got some gag order. And I have gone to some other council meetings where they kind of, it depends on the leadership at the time, but it's gone. And then you see some kind of leadership come in that does this kind of thing. And it actually frustrates the public more if they just are sitting there staring at 7 statues and feeling that they've been heard even less after taking the time. So I guess it's in the response piece to it. The word respond to community and how we're going to define that. The second thing would be, I don't think anybody would be surprised looking at the agenda that homelessness was an issue, because people are on the agenda for the additional time and have been put on the agenda with the specific topic of homelessness. And so then I do believe it puts it on the agenda. So people are already noticed that people are coming to talk about that, and that's part of what gives them 2 whole additional minutes if they sign up ahead of time, and some additional warning to the public. So I think that actually should be handled differently, because I do think that that's an agenda topic that we are prepared for, as well as the public, before they come.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. City Attorney Brown, that's an interesting point. As I'm looking at agenda now, it just says agenda in the upper corner. So is anything beneath that considered something on the agenda where you would see what people have pre-notified the city that they intend to speak about?
Honestly, not often. A lot of times someone will pre-notify the city of some vague reference, and I think everybody's taken by surprise on what's being discussed.
Sure.
There are several issues that have been dealt with just in the year since I've been here, that someone comes, they're angry, the council wants to make them feel better, and then the next day, at least my office is getting phone calls from neighbors in the area saying, wait a second, you discussed that and and the council's getting close to resolving it. And that's my issue too. That's happening in my neighborhood. Why wasn't I told? So the balancing act is what does notify the public so they'll know that they need to be there. What's a positive political response, but at the same time doesn't violate open meetings by bringing something up that is off agenda. I should let you know that it's not illegal to bring something up off agenda, but there needs to be a consensus vote that it's going to happen. So, for example, if an individual came to discuss, they said they want to discuss train traffic, and what you discover when they show up is that trains are going by their house at midnight. They've been calling the police. The trains have been ringing their bell, whatever. And you think, we really need to discuss this with the train company or whatever. At that point, it might be appropriate, because how would you know to be ready for that, to, by consensus, request that it be put on on a study session or an upcoming agenda within the next 30 days. You have control over it, no matter what you do. But I have to tell you, there have been several cases I've thought we've gotten very close to an open meetings concern.
So on that same note, I feel that sometimes people are pretty specific. I'll look at the subjects for the evening, looking at last week's. Okay, so A, Carly Schmidt will address council regarding Giving Heart. This is under the agenda. Would that be considered on the agenda then? Is that an agenda item? She has notified us in advance she will be discussing Giving Heart. That is available to the public, the same as all the agenda items.
So she's addressing you concerning Giving Heart.
Correct.
The flip side is the council, because they've heard someone address them concerning Giving Heart, on notice to the public that they're going to be taking certain actions, that they're going to be directing staff to do certain things? I think that's a totally different question. The public wanting to come and inform the council of what's going on in their lives so that the council can be aware and potentially ask for information or take action, I think is a different question than this elected body starting to take steps to discuss request information and decide what the path forward is.
Could I get a point of information? I thought that we were talking about this in connection to the city council members shall not respond to community comments under topics not noted upon the agenda. Not that we were going to take action, not that we were going to, but only to that limited piece of that. I thought that's all we were talking about on to whether somebody was on the agenda or not. And you've expanded that beyond what I thought we were discussing.
I apologize if I've expanded it. My understanding, when I hear council respond, you almost always respond by saying, I want staff to do this, I want this action to take place. There's never, not never, but there's rarely an account where it's just, I hear what you're saying, thank you for being here. A lot of times you're jumping on board, you want to fix it right that minute. And I think that that's the concern. It's not, are you pleasantly saying thank you for being here, we've heard what you've said. It's that next step. When you've started to address an issue that the public hasn't been notified you're going to be addressing.
Okay, and that's why I thought that we might want to define respond.
And on that same note, respond to me, even responding with a question is a response. Where are there any questions for the person who has just addressed council? The language as it is right now, I think you really can't say much to anything that would be on the agenda if we're not defining things that are predetermined during the comments section as agenda items. I just think as it's written now, we can't say much. And if that's how we decide to proceed, that's okay. But I think right now we're pretty handcuffed in terms of how you can respond if we were going to take a really tight read on this.
Thank you. I just have a question for the city attorney. So is it okay in that instance not to say anything at, to say anything to staff at the time of public comments during our response to public comment? But if there's something we see needs to be requested, can we ask for that during council members' choice?
Absolutely. An example. The example where I caught the most flack from people calling my office had to do with a lady appeared in front of the council early on in my tenure with concern about a fence. And she was very upset. She had specific reasons why she was upset. But the council spent about 45 minutes back, or it felt like a long time for me, back and forth with her that evening. Then they went back to it at council member discussion. But it had to do with a community issue, and the rest of the community wasn't there. Her side was heard very well. The questions were asked, the questions were framed, the requests for information were framed based on her input, but not based on the rest of the neighborhood, which that's the concern. It's not that the individual's being heard, it's that these tend to be broader issues. So you have a couple of choices, and other councils, almost every other council has this rule. But choice one is, as soon as someone's gotten done speaking, for instance on the fence issue, which is something the council really need to follow up with, step one is for one of the council members to say, I really would like more information about this. I'd like a consensus to have this put on the next available agenda. What date would that be? And at that point, I think especially on that issue, everybody would have been on board with that. If people aren't wanting to do that right at the moment, at the end you have council member comments, and at that point, during council member comments, you can say, I heard Joe Smith from Giving Heart make this comment, and as a council member, I would really like more information on X, Y, and Z. And that way, everybody knows you've requested it, that information is going to be coming back, and they can all get ready. The community can be ready to help. It's a long answer, but it's a complicated discussion.
Okay, well, and along that lines, in hindsight, going back to look at the fence issue, should that response have been to bring it forward to a study session, or, I mean, do you have a simple answer for that?
The simple answer was I would have been much more comfortable if we would brought it forward to a study session.
Okay. Information. You mean there's just that one item of her fence?
I don't think that's actually what the item was. I think it had to do with what was the building department's response to citizen complaints.
That would be a study session item
Okay.
for me, but not one
All right.
person's.
Okay, thank you. Let me let Councilmember Martinez weigh in first, and then everybody
Sure.
has.
I was just going to say thank you to our city attorney. I was going to say some of the same points. I think it is more beneficial to the person who's in front of us and the members of the community who have the same concerns to hear us say, I would like more information on that, maybe if or a council request or in a study session, so they know right then where is the next place for them to look for more information or more interaction or input on the particular topic. Because, of course we want to solve everything right then, but usually we can't. And so I think we want to set up realistic expectations for them as well, so they know what our next steps are, and I think it would be helpful if we treat it that way.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Olson?
Thank you. And that, what Councilmember Martinez just said, and building on what the attorney said, is exactly what I'm trying to get at. And I don't know why, I'm not articulating it very well, obviously, but I really love that we have citizens coming. That is not what I ever want to stop. What I don't want to do is encourage people to come because they think sometime in that first public scheduled and unscheduled, that we're going to resolve things. And people are coming thinking we are going to. And we've fallen into a pattern where we have sometimes acted like the judge or a jury there, sort of tossing things around and giving direction. I've done it too, to a point where I think it's really unhealthy for them to think we can solve things during that time. Listening to them, making sure that they're heard, that's important. And that's why we should be able to respond in some way. When I first came on council 9 years ago, we didn't say anything. We didn't ask questions. I'm the one that introduced that. I feel like we've overstepped our boundary with it, though. I almost regret it now. But I was just like what you said. When I came and watched for 6 months before I ran, I couldn't believe that people were saying really amazing things, and then everybody just sat there, and it just seemed so bizarre, like there's a public forum that you could possibly gather more information. So I introduced, could we at least ask questions so we can get more information? And then we moved and then I think it transitioned over time where we could make comments too. I would be much more comfortable with moving it to our council members' choice. And if we want to ask questions, sometimes the questions are leading, and then we get into a conversation with the person who's standing up there, and they actually are anticipating that. Some of them that come over and over, they hope we will do that because they want to be resolving it there and then. That is not the way the meeting is set up to do it, though. It's not fair to the rest of the public. I've had people call me and tell me that people got up and said something that was totally false from their perspective, and we went on and on about it, accepting what they told us as truth. And I think we've all seen that happen sometimes where after the fact you're like, that's not exactly what happened, and I wish I'd known that before I opened my mouth. I think it's protective of us as well. I want people to come and tell us things when they feel like they're not getting what they need. I hope they will come and tell us things when it isn't a problem either. So I hope we get all kinds. I think it's how we take it next. And I guess my question for the city attorney is it possible to have a response time that has 4 or 5 different possible ways we more commonly respond to things and tell the person we're going to talk about the possibility of making a council request during our council member time or something to relieve them of that anxiety of like we didn't really listen to them, we're just going to move on to the agenda now. I think that's where that piece feels like they don't know that they're listened to because we just move on.
I think that's a great compromise on this.
Okay, we could come up with 3 or 4 trigger points of this, this, or this, and some things are going to blow us out of the water. Like, I have no idea what to do with that. If we can do that legally, that's what I would love to see us do. I think the mayor or whoever's in charge of the meeting could be that one that kind of sifts through it and said, this seems to fit here. Council member, anybody have a problem with that? Okay, move that forward like that, and then just move on so they know they've been heard. I mean, last week when Mr. Beaver came and talked about the speeding on University, I wanted to say something to that effect for what would happen, and then one of the police officers went over and started talking to him and said, okay, great, it's taken care of. I'm not going to worry about it. But that can't happen with every single issue that's brought up.
All right. I actually appreciate this conversation because it's helping me understand. Part of the reason I wanted to bring this back up is I didn't totally understand all of it. Councilmember Berentine.
I think part of it's got to be a twofold deal, because especially the previous council and especially the previous mayor would constantly engage and say, I think the city manager has been working on that, and then have you start talking about it. And where there were incidents where a lot of engagement was between the city manager and the city attorney, or whoever was sitting in as the city attorney at the time, at the behest of the council. And I don't know whether that kind of puts them on the spot. And there were actually times where there were conversations going back and forth from the people coming and the city manager or the city attorney. So if we're going to go ahead and try and move this, we have to try and move away from doing that piece of it, because going and deferring to either the city manager or the city attorney for direction on that without the entire council having an opportunity to have a conversation, I think misleads the public and puts them on the spot as well. I mean, we had some pretty contentious back and forth conversations that ended up resulting between our city manager and citizens that I'm sure were uncomfortable for both. So, and sometimes we want to defend or say something we're doing, and I'm sure that the staff feels the same way sometimes too. But we have to make sure that we're not doing that, because that just exacerbates the problem and creates that issue. So if we can make sure that whatever is included with this, because I agree with doing a process, but whatever we do, that we don't do that like, oh, I know you've been working on it, so just tell them what you're doing kind of thing, when the rest of council hasn't had that conversation. So if we have 4 or 5 things that we could do, that we follow that process and don't put our staff in that position. Or that we have staff do that either. And there was one example that I'll bring up, and that's when a member of the Community Development Department came and disparaged the board and what they knew and what they made a decision on. And I think that that's kind of an inappropriate thing for them to do too, because it's not on the agenda that for them to know, so that board or board members could have been there to understand what was going to be said about the decision-making process of that board. So we want to make sure that we do that when we have staff as well, so that if it goes beyond that, we can have those 4 or 5 things and kind of get them back into that.
Okay, thank you. And so the way it's currently written, is that the way that we need to leave it? Or what about shall not respond to community comments upon policy topics? Can we qualify that? Or, and I hear the conversation about not fixing their problem. Yes,
I think based off of the discussion, it seems like, and maybe we'll double check on whether or not there's consensus for some type of appropriate response. So instead of saying shall not respond, that maybe we give you a few options for what an appropriate response is under comments that are not on the agenda. So set for study session or request.
Can I ask an
additional
informational question?
Sure.
Are you talking about maybe having it be more like a process where we could say, I thought that's what the city attorney might have suggested previously, like more of a process that you say, so one council member goes, is this something we want to bring forward? We can have some discussion amongst ourselves. And then is that kind of what you're talking about bringing forward?
Right.
Okay, thank you for the information.
Councilmember Wilson.
Building on that one, I think we could have a few different things like that one, where 4 or 5 of them might include, we're going to move this to council members' choice time for a discussion about how to take it to another step. Another one would be, there could be some quick action things, and I don't know whether it's like some of these, the police just need to follow up, or code need to follow up, and that's all it needs. We don't need to get involved. We don't need to say, wow, that sounds awful, although it does.
Right.
I hope it's true. If it's not, don't do this. That kind of, I don't know if we could have a little grid up front where we're all thinking it fits one of these, and then we say that's what we're going to do. So I don't know if just open response, you might have to rework the wording.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is some type of process where you're allowed to give the member of the public that came to speak an idea of what action the council may take to address that, just not take an action
Right.
that evening.
I think that's what people just need to know, that you heard and that it's not just going to be, well, you heard it, but you're not doing anything. That there's some next step that someone's going to take on their behalf to check it out further.
One more quick question.
Councilmember Barentine.
Well, I don't think Councilmember Cuesta has had this experience, but the rest of us have, where, and mine just recently, where somebody comes and personally attacks you, and I believe that you should have the opportunity to respond to that. If somebody comes up and calls you a liar and a thief and a pirate, whatever, I think you have an obligation to respond. I don't think that we sit up there as free targets, so I don't think that it needs to go on forever, but I think you have a right to go ahead and tell somebody you think that they're off track.
I think that's fair. Again, this is really getting at an action of the council.
And I think that's where I still am kind of just concerned about the word respond, because as Councilmember Cuesta pointed out, it's broad as putting tape on your mouth, so I want to make sure that we have that.
We'll clarify. I think we have enough to craft a revised policy that should address that.
Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I think the one concern that Councilmember Barentine brought up will be covered in decorum, and that would come over to response to public comment also if you're personally attacked. Okay. Oh, Councilmember Cuesta, did you?
I'm sure my day will come, Councilman.
Oh, I will.
Oh, it will. It comes for all of us.
Checks in the
I'll
mail,
hand
probably.
You might be the one that it doesn't.
If you do your job, it will come.
I think that the 4 or 5 responses we can have is a great idea. Who would determine those then? You would be determining those and then bring them back before us?
We put it in the policy. I think we just try to cover your general options, request for information, put on a study session, that type of thing.
And the truth is, those general observations, each one of us would personalize how that looks in.
Yes, we'll massage it, and obviously, we're not going to make you read off of a canned response. It's just a matter of giving you some parameters so that the public can know you're following up without taking formal action that's not noted.
That may streamline a bit too. I think that's a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can move on.
All right. Rules of decorum. So I can go through any one of these. I wasn't planning on reading through each of them, but there are 28 different rules of decorum. It was requested to talk a little bit more about decorum since we added to your procedure manual that's now adopted a point of decorum. So this would be for any violations of the 28 items in this draft policy manual. I believe, I'd have to double check with Attorney Brown, I think all of these are currently in your policy manual, the one that you've had previously or under your current manual. So the first 8 I've listed up on the slide. These 8 are all, I would say, general rules of decorum. And then 9 through 13 get into specific study session policies, and then 14 through 28 are all public meeting items. So I suppose, and again, just as a clarification, so it would be the role of the chairperson, the mayor, to govern over the rules of decorum. However, because you have adopted Bob's Rules of Order with the point of decorum, any member, any council member could raise a point of decorum if they feel like one of the issues is being raised, and there would be a ruling from the chair on whether or not the decorum item is violated or not. That chairperson's ruling is subject to appeal, so if the body does not agree with the chairperson's ruling, you have the opportunity to overrule that. So just a little idea on process, but a number of items covered under this. So perhaps if there are any questions, I'd be happy to
Okay, are there any questions or comments on this section? I do think a lot of these are covered in the current policy manual, but there have been things added to some of these descriptions also. Councilmember Olson.
So the seating arrangement thing has been an odd one for the last several years in here. And it's originally, when I first came on, the mayor, when a new council was elected, gave by privilege of years of service, allowed one by one for people to choose their seat, and you stayed there the whole time, and it was pretty set. I didn't like sitting over there all the time because it's back to the door, but I got used to it. That has not been the case in here, and it's been a little awkward. So I'd just like to know, are we going to follow this for this meeting or not? And whether, I mean, that's what this says, right? Mm-hmm. And that would include probably the meeting that we have with Diana DeGette or anywhere else, right? If we're all together in a...
So, and like when Diana DeGette has been here before, there's not always a lot of council members, and so we generally, it's just more... Yeah,
do we care in those kinds of things?
Yeah.
Or does it matter? I just think we should have an agreement on what we're doing or not.
Okay, any thoughts on that? Councilmember Berentine.
I don't think we really had a...
Speak up.
I don't think we really had a seating arrangement for in here, nor do I agree that we should have for every meeting that we have with council. God forbid you're the only person and you got to sit at the end of the table, because that I don't think that the issue should be for the study session as much as it is for obviously the council meeting.
It does. It says that in here.
And that's the kind of what I had said, and maybe you didn't understand what I was referring to. Is I think that it should not be for the meeting in here as much as it is for the council meeting.
Yeah, I agree. So
we'll
just have to change it.
I know, but when you do that and you just push it at me and point, I don't know what you're pointing at. So if you could just...
Okay. All right. This is what
you're right.
saying.
I have the floor. I apologize.
Yeah. All right.
I shouldn't have let that distract me, but I was confused. It would...
Please just go on.
Okay. I think out of... I don't think that it's a good idea for us to try to have some kind of seating arrangement for every event that we have going on. The mayor didn't pick our seating arrangement for in here. We didn't pick, so I think kind of moving around sometimes was just nicer. And I tried it over there for a little while, and then I didn't like having something behind me, so I liked kind of moving around. So I think that's kind of silly, and I think it's kind of silly for any kind of other meeting that we have.
Okay. Thank you. And I understand why the seating arrangement in the council chambers is because we, we're in an order, the voting is set up by there. And I do believe that this, and I don't know, the mayor very well could have chosen in past councils before we were on. So Councilmember Olson, if you'd like to respond to that prior to us.
I'm just reading what's in our...
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm just reading this document, and what it says right now is seating arrangement. Members shall occupy their respective assigned seats in the council chamber or any forum at which the council shall convene as a body. Assignments will be made by the mayor. Any two or more members may exchange seats by joining in a written notice to the mayor. I mean, that's never happened either. So I'm pointing this out saying it's in here, so we have to decide are we going to keep with it or not. My experience has been in here, we have every 2 years when things have changed, the mayor didn't necessarily choose the 4 mayors that I've served. They said, let's go by seniority, whoever's, and a couple of times it was the same people, so they have to choose, and we set it up and that was it. I don't think it mattered much back then if we had moved around, because we were just we were audibly recorded. Right now we're visually recorded as well, and if you've ever watched a study session, it is very hard to hear people and figure out who's talking, because the video doesn't necessarily follow you right away. And I think for this meeting and that meeting and there, it would be best for the public to have them at the same places so everybody knows that they sort of get a pattern and they know where they are. That would be my suggestion. I think for other things, it does seem silly. I don't know if people want to have a notice to the mayor, a minimum. Maybe there are some changes people want to make, and I'm fine with that as well. I just think that I have heard from the public that they have a hard time figuring out who's speaking at the study session when they're watching.
Okay.
I don't know if others have heard that or not, but.
All right, I appreciate that. And actually, this was all in the old policy manual, except for the statement that says, or any forum at which council shall convene as a body. That was not in the old one. And then this other sentence, such notice should be received by the mayor a minimum of 24 hours prior to the scheduled meeting. Other than that, the rest of it was in the previous policy manual. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I agree with what Councilmember Olson said. When you watch the video, you can't even read the name tags, so it is hard for folks to know who's speaking or to even identify who that is. If we can see our name tags here, on the video you can't really see that. So I think for that reason it makes sense to have assigned seating in here. If the mayor picks it or we choose it, I don't care. I think we should remove the line that says, or any forum at which the council shall convene as a body. I don't think we necessarily need that. You know, if we are at a Tri-Cities meeting or out to dinner or what have you, I don't think we should always be in arranged, robot orders. So other than that, I think everything in here is fine.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I consider that room the council chamber, and this is not. Is that correct?
Correct.
So this would constitute that any other forum when we're in this room?
Well, I would say it's part of that, any other forum. So, and I mean, I'm okay with leaving out any forum at which council shall convene as a body. And if we decide that we want to sit in a specific order in here, and maybe we should, but if we decide that we're going to do that, I don't think it necessarily has to be written in here. Because I do think there are times when a member is absent and it looks better if we're, seated closer together instead of spread out. I mean, that's my opinion.
And I guess I will leave it. I'm very agreeable on this matter, whichever way we go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councilmember Bernstein?
I was very agreeable to whatever we decided to until Amy said people were confusing us all. And if people are confusing me with Amy, if somebody is confusing me with somebody decades younger, I kind of want that confusion to happen. So I would miss out on that. So I don't think it's it's a huge deal one way or the other. But I kind of agree with you that the other forums, I agree. Just like the Bi-Cities plant, water plant. Sometimes you go over and start talking to somebody else, and you just, the staff just puts the things out like they're going to. We're not going to have some kind of royal list that we give people to go. Here's the seating order of how we go. I don't want to do that, but for council, that's fine. I would consider this another forum too, but.
Okay, thank you. City Attorney.
It was difficult when you asked for a red line of this policy, and what you got was every single line is a red line, and that's why I didn't give it to you in the first place. It doesn't help because what I was trying to do was consolidate some of this incredibly repetitive language that was all the way through and difficult for you guys to follow. So I tried to pull together everything having to do with seating arrangements and put them all in one paragraph. At the same time, because I'm new here, a lot of persons, especially older members of the community, wanted to come up to my office and meet with me and sit down and visit with me. And I listened to what they were having to say. And one of the concerns that I heard several people, and again, these people tended to be older, but they don't like watching the video because it's hard to understand who's speaking, and the quality is kind of grainy. So while I'm thinking everybody can pick out Dave, other than that,
We all look like Amy.
you are all clearly all female persons, and so it does get difficult for people to tell who's speaking and who's got whatever point of view. So as I was putting all that together, I was keeping in mind the concerns that members of the community who use those videos were expressing to me, and that's why I put in at any forum. The other thing is Councilmember Cuesta nailed this one when he said, so I consider that the council chamber and not this the council chamber. If you're watching on video, you don't know what room people are in. I mean, they don't. What they know is this is being put out there as a meeting of the city council. And while you're sitting here thinking, but I'm in the study session room, I'm not in the council chamber room, your community doesn't see that at all. So I don't think we need to go about renaming the council chamber. It is what it is. But there needs to be some way of identifying when you're sitting for a business meeting, and this is a business meeting, even though you're not making decisions, it is, that people who are watching the videos have a way to clearly identify who you are. So that's why I added in the extra language about any forum at which the council shall convene as a body was specifically to incorporate this room. That may not be the right language, but those are the concerns the community has been expressing.
Councilmember Barrington.
I want to make sure that if there is any confusion for people in the public when they're listening to a meeting, that we make sure that there is no doubt that we are not in council chamber when they are watching this. Whatever it is that we need to do on the video or however we're seated, whoever's talking, whatever's going on with it, they have to understand that this is merely an informational meeting, that we are not making decisions here, and that the two are not even close to being intermingled with each other. So if there is, as you're saying, some confusion between the two, that's very concerning because we don't make decisions here, and I certainly want people to understand that that's not happening here and that we're not voting here. So I don't know how we do that, but I don't think it's in the seating that's going to fix that, but whatever it is we need to do for the video or the identification of this meeting to make that really very clear.
Thank you. City Attorney.
I think the meeting is labeled study session, and I think that that's clear. Whether you perceive it or don't perceive it, when you are sitting as a body discussing the business of the city, you're perceived as the city council. And while, again, you're here in this room, you understand your role is different, you're not allowed to make decisions. People watching are seeing the city council, and they want to know who's speaking and what your attitudes, what your individual attitudes are. And again, I would love to say wear a name tag, but you can't see that on this video. You're all attractive, healthy people. It shows clearly on the video, but exactly who you are all the time is not always clear. So if there's a way other than by just having assigned seats that might make that easier, let us know so we can make sure that we're doing the best job of allowing you to communicate directly with your constituents.
And I think, in addition to that, I think also in everybody putting up their name tag and being recognized when they're called on, if the public is paying close attention, they should know who's speaking. Okay. Councilmember Olson.
Thank you. Should know or do know is a different question, though. I think it's hard. Really, when you watch the study sessions, they're the worst ones. I had not heard, it was helpful, Attorney Brown, to hear that it's been around even the room and hadn't realized that. But people who I have known that have watched this knew what a study session were, and they were absolutely understanding that, but couldn't figure out who was speaking. And I think that's gone on for a long time since we started the video thing. It's not just been in the last year or two. Okay. But I do think that it could help someone suggested if you just stay in the same seat, I'd know sort of what side someone was coming from on that. Wow, that really helped, didn't it? So I would suggest that we just say that it's this room and that room. We stay where we are, and the rest is fine. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
That is loud.
Councilmember
I would
Martinez.
concur with what Councilmember Olson said. I think, on the video, like you said, it's hard to see, but, we know that the mayor pro tem sits here, the mayor, city attorney sits there, city manager sits there, our guests sit here, and so I think it would be helpful just visually to have council members stay in the same place. Even if there is a gap and I have to sit over here and there's nobody here, I think that's fine.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Cuesta?
Agreed. Sounds good.
Okay. All right. I think we can move
And
on.
I hate to ask a follow-up question, but those will be chosen by, those seating arrangements will be chosen by the mayor for both?
Actually, you know what? I actually like the way it was done before, or in there by seniority.
So the same way that you all decided the seats up
I think that's
in chambers? Okay. We
So
can.
the three of us would have to arm wrestle over who.
Or apply 2 days ahead of time.
Or rock, paper, scissors.
okay. So actually, we need to go on, right? Is there any?
Yes. Any other rules of decorum that this body would like to discuss?
Can I ask a question about personal privilege?
Yes.
How exactly does this happen? The right of a member to address city council on a question of personal privilege shall be limited to cases. So is that, how does that come to be? How does that happen? I haven't necessarily seen it used.
Well, this.
And when should,
I mean, this gets at exactly what Councilmember Barentine was talking about a little while ago. Certainly, in that case, if you're following Bob's Rules of Order, I think the proper procedure would be to say, point of decorum, Councilmember Barentine would get the floor and then be able to address this personal privilege.
Personal privilege is not in Bob's Rules of Order. It's in Robert's Rules of Order. And it was adopted from Robert's Rules of Order into the existing policies and procedures. Since it doesn't require an action on the part of the council, I don't see any reason to remove it. But it's not about responding to the community. I think what Councilmember Barentine was saying earlier was a totally different issue. This is about responding to each other. When, for example, Councilmember Martinez says something and then Councilmember Olson should cut her off and not let her finish it or whatever, and say, but Councilmember Martinez, you're evil, whatever. Then Councilmember Martinez would get to say point of personal privilege. I think the statement was just made about X, and I want that clarified. So point of privilege is, personal privilege is an opportunity to clarify a conflict among the body.
thank you, that's helpful.
And if it's a point, should it be included in the points in Robert's rules or in Bob's rules?
We can certainly amend Bob's rules to include it. I call it a point of personal privilege. What your policy manual calls it is a question of personal privilege. So, again, it's not an action that requires an action of the body, but it's the right of an individual to defend their reputation against another member of the body. My concern with that, with leaving it out of Bob's rules, is that at some point I could see if people felt very strongly, it could devolve into bickering, which slows down your meeting. So one of the positive reasons about putting something about it into the Bob's rules would be to allow the mayor to control those interactions.
Okay, and I mean, I think that's something that we could address even later, right, if we need to do that, unless somebody wants to do that now. Okay, so excusal during the meeting. There was a phrase added in here that was not in the original. It's at the end. If the presiding officer leaves the city council chambers during a regular meeting, the mayor pro tem shall assume the role of presiding officer. Isn't that really unnecessary since that is the role of the mayor pro tem anyway? City Attorney Brown?
That is the role of the mayor pro tem. It's a point of clarification if we want it in there, and you don't have to have it in there if it's not. I think it's when a mayor leaves due to illness or whatever, I think it's so startling that it takes people a little bit to remember what the steps are. So I think that that's why that was included there.
Okay, I'm okay with that unless Councilmember. Okay. Anyone else?
This would be a complete departure from the meeting, correct? Not just somebody departs for 5 minutes.
Well, and it's very possible that, I mean, I saw in the previous council when Joe got up and left for a few minutes and he asked the mayor pro tem to take over for him. So, Councilmember Olson.
That happened a number of times with Mayor Penn as well, and I think it's helpful to have it in so that people know that there is a process, and usually it's nice if the mayor says, I'm taking, usually it's a bio break. And sometimes it's because someone's not feeling well, maybe they just need to get up and walk around. I don't know, maybe shouldn't come. But anyway, I do think it's helpful for people to know that's what the process is and we're following it if they don't understand the roles. But it is redundant.
Okay.
You're right. It's
All right,
redundant.
thank you. Were you finished?
That answers it. Thank you.
Okay. City Attorney Brown.
I discovered that there are rules of decorum in the code that bind you as well as within the policy. They tend to overlap, but one of the things that I've been stating over and over, turns out incorrectly in some cases, is that policies are policies and the code is the law and the two do not mix. But it turns out you do have several rules of decorum within your code at 15210, and that concerns me because, for example, just a second, I'm going to pull one up that really concerns me. There's one that says that if one council member while the council is in session, the members must preserve order and decorum, which you all do your best to do, and a member shall neither by conversation or otherwise delay or interrupt the proceedings or the peace of the council, nor disturb any member while speaking, or refuse to obey the orders of the council or its presiding officer. Well, I've seen on several occasions where people have not obeyed immediately the presiding officer's direction. And because this is in your code, that choice is breaking the law. I don't like that. So what I would really like to suggest is that you feel very comfortable with your rules of decorum and allow me to take the decorum rules out of the code, because I don't think that those should be the law. I think how you govern yourselves and each other is not, I just don't think it should be the law. That just makes me incredibly uncomfortable.
Okay, do we have any feedback on that? Councilmember Wilson.
Question. Can you tell when they were put in like that? Have they been there a long time?
1985.
Wow, I wonder what happened back then. It's got to be historical.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Any other comments, or just want to?
I can consent to that too. Hey, are we going to have somebody arrested? Probably not. Should probably not make that law breaking, so just to go that far.
Okay, is there one other person that's?
I agree. I'm fine with you taking it out.
Okay, me too. All right. Thank you. Okay, as far as the rest of the first 8, they were all in the previous policy manual. I don't have any issues. What about study session policy? Councilmember Olson.
I have a question about number 9.
Okay.
Because I think we've been even violating it or a lot of different times. So I wonder how we can make this clear for everybody. I mean, materials on new information must be received before the study session. We all want that, but some people bring things and I can think of several occasions where new stuff was brought in. Is there any leeway for this that makes sense for us? And then no information presented without backup material can be presented. I love that. I would like to always, but we've often, not often, but we've had times where we were given information without necessarily backup. But the third one, no decision will be made until all members have had an opportunity to review the information. I love that, because if we do get stuff out of the blue, I don't think we should have to decide.
Absolutely.
So I'm just concerned about this one. Does it sit well with everybody the way it's written?
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Bernstein?
I think in keeping with the open meetings law and the public being able to have access to the information that we're making our decision on, we have to stick to that. I mean, we have to have that happen. Otherwise, we've got people handing things out or doing anecdotal information here and saying, I don't have it, but here's what I heard and here's what's going on. And then we're kind of basing our decision off of that without the backup for it. And then maybe the backup comes later and it isn't exactly the way that it was anecdotally brought to us. So I do think in order for the public to have access to the information that we're making our decisions on or reviewing, that we have to make sure that we have it available.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Olson?
I think in theory I totally agree with that. I can think of a number of times recently when that hasn't happened. And so then I wonder about what the process is to make sure that people who are presenting or doing something, I hate to harp on this, but the night we talked about the mayor decision, I think we've had this conversation ourselves, that I felt like you got a little bit set up for that because you handed out stuff that none of us had before, and that wasn't a legitimate conversation about that topic because of that way. I would want someone to stop him to say that's not, I mean, it was early on. So how do we make sure that when people come to present, or, I mean, I think all of us know now we shouldn't be doing it that way, but how can we make sure people bring everything that they need to this meeting? So we're not getting, I don't think anecdotal is a commonly used word for some of this, but I don't think some of it's very anecdotal either. Some of it's really serious, important stuff. It's just not been disseminated in a way that's going to be helpful to us. Right. Is there a way in the mayor-manager meeting that a little bit more checkpoints of what do I want to make sure this person who's coming to present knows?
And I'm going to let the city manager respond to that. I do believe that in the last couple months that there has been more of a concerted effort for that to happen. City manager.
Thank you. Yeah, we have been working. The mayor has been impressing upon me the need, and I agree, for us to have complete materials for you so that we don't have that. And I think there have been some instances where persons who are come from the outside to present have not turned their materials in, and we endeavor to try our best to try to get them to do so, and in some cases we're successful. In some cases they just come with a flash drive for that evening to make a presentation to you in a study session. I think our larger concern is exactly what happens next door in the council chamber, that packet have materials that are nailed down. We obviously want to do that here too in study sessions, but as has been discussed tonight, since you're not making decisions in a study session, the material perhaps isn't as important. It is to me. I'm not saying it's not important, but we have been working to get out ahead and try to be a couple weeks ahead of time with study sessions as well as our regular meetings to make sure that we have materials in the iCompass system and have some gates by which things aren't going to move forward unless we have those materials. But occasionally, again, if you're going to have an outside speaker come, some of them take more diligence than others in ensuring that we have the materials, even after impressing upon them the need to have that available to the public as well as the council.
Thank you. Councilmember Bernstein?
Well, then I would just suggest that, and that does happen, and that happens to staff. It happens, obviously, to council members as well. And I think that the remedy for that is exactly the second. The second piece to that is just that nothing is that urgent then if that additional information came at the last minute like that, where it couldn't be more vetted out or discussed or viewed by the public, then the information has to come back. In the instance where Councilmember Questa brought that information, I don't think then we have to stop looking at the issue that he's doing, but then saying, let's go ahead and take a look at this and bring this information back, rather than either thumbs up or thumbs down that night to just say, there's a lot of information here, we didn't have it ahead of time, let's go ahead and look at it and have that brought to another session, maybe cut some of that conversation short and just let an opportunity at another time. You can't always stop outside presenters from doing that. I realize that. And I don't want to cheat the public out of that. I do think it's just as important here, because the decisions we make in the other room are supposed to be based off of what we learn here and what we discuss here and what's provided to us here. So I do think it's important for us to make sure that that's made available, certainly well prior to the decisions being made in council, if it gets brought at that night at a study session. So I think that would be one way to kind of solve the problem that Council Member Olson and the city manager are looking at. We just have to be aware of that, because otherwise we've run into issues where it's like, but we're in a hurry. Well, then if it was a hurry and we couldn't get it in enough time to meet those requirements, both for the open meetings, open records, information for the public and information for us, then maybe it just means it's going to have to be delayed a little if the information couldn't get to us in a timely manner.
Okay, and I think that is in here somewhere, where it talks about if there's emergency, it's 15. Yes, new information related to an emergency situation should be made available to City Council, but may be disregarded by City Council upon a majority vote.
Well, apparently we can disregard a whole lot of things. But, I mean, as a matter of, just like the example that was brought up, then we could have just said, Councilmember Questa, we're going to talk about this. Well, next week, thanks for bringing us the material, and have had a better conversation about the issue he wanted to discuss. That's all, just more of a procedure thing. But I think it's happening to the staffs. Thank you very much for that, and the mayor, that it's happening a lot less. So, I mean, it's not going to go away totally, but I think it's happening a lot less, and that's more planning and thoughtfulness and being prepared, and it's appreciated.
All right, thank you. Okay, number 10, I have a question mark by this. It says request for information from members of the City Council or written response to a citizen's concern must go through the city manager's office. I don't think that was in the former policy manual anywhere. Is there a reason behind this one?
It was.
Sorry.
The current policy manual states requests for information to a citizen's concern must go through the city manager's office. So that part is in the current policy. But where it's been added to is from members of the city council or written responses to a citizen's concern. If it's verbal responses to a citizen, that's what staff does all day long. So of course that's not going to go through the city manager's office. But I think that this is to come up with basically to respond to the council member requests, which are already running through the city manager's office, to make sure that he's aware of what policies his staff is carrying out.
Okay. Any comments or questions on that or anything else? 11 is in the current policy manual. Request for information made by city council member to staff should result in information provided to all members of city council. 12, I don't think I found this one. I mean, it might. During council communications, council members may request a status update on a matter previously acted upon by council. Council members may also request a matter be placed back upon a future agenda as a result of new information becoming available. To place a matter on the agenda, the council must vote by consensus to proceed. So we probably need to change the word vote.
Act. It should be act by consensus.
Okay, act.
It currently reads, old issues may be brought back for status update, which is so vague. So I got rid of old issues and put during council communications, council members may. So I was trying to clarify something, but there is, again, this is building on what's already in there. And yeah, you're right, we should be changing the word vote to act by consensus to proceed.
And then, unless there's comments on that, number 13, it says a consensus vote may be used by City Council to clarify direction to the city manager or establish procedural matters such as agenda setting. That cannot be codified, can it? I mean,
It currently reads in your policy, a consensus vote by City Council may be used to clarify direction to the city manager. That's the current statement. And it's grammatically makes me a little crazy, so I moved it around just a little bit. So now it says a consensus vote may be used. The phrase consensus vote is all the way through your existing policy, and a consensus is not an actual vote. A vote is a legal act. So we're going to want to change the mayor's absolutely right. We need to change that phrase consensus vote to be a consensus and just leave it at that. You can act by consensus.
okay, Councilmember Bernstein.
Will we get some kind of, is there a definition of acting by consensus? Because when we do that, and when it's happened in the past, when I see other meetings, when people are doing that, it looks like they're voting. Like, do we have a consensus? I agree. Looks just like a vote. So is there a way we can define that it can make it a little bit more understandable both for us and for the public, so that...
I absolutely agree. We do need to do something about that.
Okay, because when we go back then and we had consensus on that as if we had a vote, and we don't really have the same weight as a vote. And so a definition, I think, would make it a lot better, because a lot easier for both the council and the public. If it isn't a vote and it doesn't have the weight of a decision, then we have to make sure that we understand that. And I'm not quite sure sometimes what the difference is.
Yeah.
So if we could come up with an idea, then maybe we'd have something better to follow.
Okay, the next 14 through 28 is about public meeting policy. So this would be City Council in the council chambers. And the first two, 14 and 15, are part of open meetings laws, right? I read 15 about the emergency information. 16, avoid surprises. And I do have a question about this. Councilmember Martinez, do you want to?
Yeah, I have a question about 16 also. It says, avoid surprises as a matter of common courtesy. Members should notify City Council through the City Manager prior to a public session when they plan to remove an item from the consent agenda. We've had this come up time and time again, and I'm just wondering what the best way forward through that is. Can individual council members email the City Manager directly, or does it require consensus from council to remove one item? Just one individual can say, I want this off. Okay. And they should do that in advance.
Okay, and I want to talk about consent agenda item, because they get put on there, they just show up. And sometimes we don't know. I mean, so I'm wondering if we need to revisit this. Councilmember Olson.
Yeah, I have a question about those. So both 16 and 18 seem to say the same thing. Do they not?
Oh,
and then,
yeah, they do.
And then the question has arisen, and I think I mentioned this on the dais one time, if we could talk about what gets on the consent agenda, because things were being pulled off so often. Could we find a norm by which they would just automatically not ever end up on consent agenda, because we all agree that we don't want them there if it's that kind of a decision. And so I think it would be really helpful to me, and maybe to the rest of you, if maybe our city manager and others who put things on consent agenda tell us what the trigger points are for to put them on a consent. I've known in the past what I thought they were, but they've changed a little bit, just some of them. Most of them I have no trouble with them being on consent agenda. And I've never pulled one off, but I've agreed once or twice when they have been like, yeah, it's fine. So.
Yeah, consent calendar really is Russian roulette for us. I'll be honest. What we try to do is go through a sensitivity analysis with the director team as well as the clerk who puts the agenda together to ascertain what we believe is going to be non-controversial, which should flow through and shouldn't have any issues. Now, granted, early on, several things that were on consent calendar that were procurement related did not have. It was a learning time for us to understand what many of you on council wanted to see from a financial perspective, and I think we've gotten to a point where we understand now what you want to see, such as the account, where it came from in the budget, how much have you spent this year, how much do you have left. We got that. I think you've seen that we've done much better with that. Other items, frankly, again, we try to avoid, in some cases, policy-related questions. If you're making a policy decision, we feel like that's something that may require discussion. But we certainly could use some guidance from council as to what would come forward, because it is kind of confounding for us, too, as I look back, and we did an analysis, actually, of several council meetings to understand why council pulled some items off and why some, which I thought would have a numerable or unending discussion during the regular meeting, whether by motion, had no discussion at all. They're just a motion and a... So I'm like, okay, we got to figure this out so we can do a better job. Right now, there is no criteria. There is not a process or a policy that relates to how items should flow on an agenda, other than what makes sense, like for adoption of an IGA or ordinances and such. But we're looking for direction, too, I believe, on this, and would like to collaborate with you. Each mayor is a little bit different as well. Again, when I first started, Mayor Penn wanted to have a discussion about how things are going to be placed on the agenda. Mayor Jefferson was like, man, you just figure that out, and we'll go forward. It's a business item. That's really up to you. And we're still trying to gel with Mayor Russell here to figure out how things are going to go. So we're open for that discussion.
And I mean, the truth is on the one that I pulled last week, I saw it on the consent agenda, but I really didn't realize the impact until I actually read everything about it. So I guess there's...
To piggyback on Manager Keck, we're just trying to save a little bit of time, and there is no science behind it. So some guidance would be helpful, especially because our direction to the staff that ultimately presents these items, if our judgment is that it ends up on the consent agenda, we're probably directing our staff that, oh, you should be fine. I don't think a sophisticated presentation is necessary, when perhaps council does want much more information and more of a sophisticated presentation. So I think that's where some of these items are getting at, is to say if we've judged something to be on the consent agenda and you have a question about it, then let us get prepared for that question so that can be a part of the presentation at the council meeting.
So is part of this consent agenda, the reason you need to know ahead of time is because you need to have staff here
Correct.
to answer the questions?
And we actually hedge that. We actually have staff come regardless. They're prepared, as you've seen, if it's on consent or not, the staff will come, and if consent gets passed and their item's passed, then they get to leave. In some instances, and we try to avoid it, we're actually paying overtime for those people to be present. But again, we're trying to be very judicious about that as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Barentine? Okay. Go ahead, Councilmember Barentine. I called you.
Go ahead, Councilmember Costa, go ahead.
I called on you.
Sometimes I think that the reason that the items on the other are because there is a presentation done and there aren't up front. And there are questions that are being asked. The angst over having something pulled from the consent agenda baffles me, because all it does is create is somebody's wanting to have discussion or more information. So the initial reaction to pulling anything from the consent agenda, as if it was some slap in the face to anybody, was baffling to me. I mean, it's just asking for some additional information or questions or clarification, or to get that presentation piece of it. A case in point would be the tasting issue that happened. No presentation, no study session, no information on why it was being brought forward. And maybe staff would go, oh, this is happening in all of these other places, and it's kind of a process that's been done, and just wouldn't know that we would have those additional questions and want that. But I don't think it's not bad for anybody. It's not something that's, I don't know, there's been so much contention about it, and all it is to have a discussion on something rather than just look as if we're rubber stamping something through. So it needs to just be those items where there aren't any contention, where it is pretty straightforward. A lot of times, looking at the issue, I don't think it's appropriate for us to go ahead and have individually a conversation with the staff about what's going on with it. We need to bring the question that we have from reading this to the whole council. So, I mean, I don't want to miss that piece, but I don't think that discussion is a surprise to staff, because we're just having this conversation and getting more information on it. So it's weird the way it's worded. It's like, no surprises. Well, it's a surprise to everybody if I go and have a private conversation with staff, get my questions and my issues all answered, and then I've got to try and reinvent that at the council meeting to go, here's where I had this, and you're all not getting the information at the same time. And I go, but what he said was to my question, and that's why I'm going to not vote for it now, is because I got this additional information privately. So I would prefer that it came up. I mean, if there's a way that we could go ahead and let the staff know ahead of time. And sometimes, I mean, there's times that I'm reading the packet pretty late sometimes on certain issues, and then I go back on something, so I may change my mind. But if there's some way that we could at least let the staff know, if we do know ahead of time, that at least we're considering pulling it. But I don't think it's really fair to go into depth on the issue of why without the whole council being part of that, because there's no way that I could bring up, I'm pulling this liquor tasting thing because, without making him kind of respond and ask more questions that I think that the whole body needs to do at one time in a public setting. And I'm not sure how to balance those two.
Okay, thank you. City Manager.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to respond to that. I appreciate that perspective. That's very helpful to us as staff. And again, we'll just make the statement: we're not trying to put things on the consent calendar to slip them past the council either, because we know.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, we know you read that, and we want to give you the information you need. And you know, I think what you'll find is staff's a lot like a golden retriever. We want to please you, and we're going to bring forth as much information as we can. But one of the things that we would like to know, and I appreciate the fact that Councilmember Barentine brought it up, let us know ahead of time. What has been unusual for me, and still almost being here for 4 years now in Colorado, is that a lot of other states and a lot of other communities I've worked in, whether small or large, they use a study session a little bit differently. They use a study session to actually have in-depth study on topics, but also go through the agenda ahead of time. And we don't do that here in Colorado, and specifically here in this community. To run through the agenda and look at topics and say, hey, do you have questions? Or, yeah, I got a question about this before we go into the room. And it's still done in a public setting. But recognizing we don't have that format here, it would be helpful ahead of time if we knew that you had concerns or questions. Feed them to us so that we can allow that staff person to be better prepared to discuss that at the meeting. And I'm happy ahead of time to say, hey, I received these questions ahead of time, and email them out or do whatever we can to get that out so that the public can see those as well, whether it's on iCompass or not. We'll figure a system out.
Is there a point of information? Are you asking prior to going into the meeting from the study session to go into the meeting that you would at least like to know?
Yes.
I mean, if
Yes.
somebody didn't know ahead of time,
Yeah.
like on Thursday, go, oh, for sure, I'm going to pull that because
Yeah.
I want more information. But if by the time you're going to the meeting, would that at least be helpful?
It would be, yeah, because
All
at
right.
least at that point, then I could tell, hey, Mr. Woulf, this is going to be coming up. Councilmember X has this concern. Be prepared to speak to that, so that so you can be prepared when that comes off. And that's the question that needs to be delved into.
I did not realize that even that short notice might be of
Yeah.
some value.
Yeah.
That's worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you.
That's worthwhile to know.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. If I can get just a bit more clarification on the role the mayor plays then in forming that consent agenda. It sounded like Mayor Penn had involvement. Mayor Jefferson was pretty hands-off and just let you craft it yourself, and you guys are still working through it. Is that defined what role the mayor should play in the consent agenda at this time?
It is not, and I'll tell you the difficult nature of this. Our charter is unclear. It's murky on this particular issue as to basically it said the city manager shall produce an agenda on Thursday night by close of business, which we do. It's easier to forecast, obviously, our study sessions, what we're talking about, study session topics and items, and the mayor and I work very closely to do that. What is more difficult is the business side of things, or the administrative side, as to which contract's going to come forward and the council's going to deal with. And we don't get into discussion at our mayor-managers meeting, if you listen to them online now, where we're actually having that level of discussion. And candidly, I think staff would like the discretion to be able to, to do that, to say, hey, this contract's not ready, and I can't promise now. We're actually working to try to make a system so that we know when things are going to come forward and when. But as for the placement on the agenda, no, there is no direction in policy or charter or otherwise that indicates the level of participation of the mayor.
Thank you. And up to this point, I can think of 2, maybe 3 items that have been pulled, so it doesn't happen that often. But the ones in last week, I think a lot of questions there, so it makes sense. I do see a difference between 16 and 18, where 16 specifically addresses if you're going to remove an item from consent agenda, whereas 18 just says forward any questions to the manager in advance if you have them. I kind of like the idea, too, that maybe these questions are better handled in public on the dais, and we could certainly do that. We can send them to you in advance, and then they're in the packet, but I think sometimes a public dialogue goes a long way on those
Sure.
issues. So if I'm understanding correctly, and I didn't really say anything either, there's no obligation for the city manager to involve the mayor or council in setting the consent agenda. That's written.
That's correct, sir.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Mayor Protem.
one point of information on that I would like is that it behooves him to know that we want to discuss it.
Right.
Because while he can set an agenda, we could tell him we ain't talking about it. So I understand how that's evolved to go ahead and have some buy-in from the council. So I think there's been a lot of leeway for each leadership. But in the end, if he's just setting it on his own in an island, that puts him in a very awkward position as
And
well.
I'm not on that island.
Yeah.
Don't call me Gilligan.
He doesn't want it. The mayor's a little bridge.
Councilmember Martinez.
I had some similar questions that have been brought up and some suggestions as well. The questions in advance, I think, would be very helpful to staff and I think to the rest of council. Maybe we have some of the same questions that would be beneficial as we're talking through those, or maybe additional information provided in the packet based on what questions may come. I think that could be helpful. Also, I don't know how often this happens, but maybe we could set aside, in some cases like that, if it is going to be pulled or we need to talk about it quickly before we go in there, maybe we set aside some time in the study sessions before our regular meetings to kind of go over some of that. Maybe a better use of staff time than having to wait and then we pull it. That's not, like you said, there's overtime and, stuff like that. But maybe if it would make sense, we could start saving some pieces of our study session agenda before the regular meeting to get some of those questions answered more thoroughly.
Mayor? Yeah, you certainly could do that. I think the one thing you'd be cognizant of is your informal rules, the Kells rule, the Woodward rule, those types of rules that may prohibit that type of activity. I think over time those things have propped up. But staff certainly would be open to a system such as that to, again, ensure that we are providing you with the most and best information possible to help make a decision.
Or just completely take it off and set, 30 minutes for a study session at some other time when everyone feels comfortable that they have all the information they need.
I can't. It's on the agenda. Okay.
Well, it could be tabled if.
But
if
not
you were
here.
No,
Correct.
but you have to go back into the regular meeting.
Yeah.
There is nothing that prevents council from asking questions before going into regular session. It's been informally discouraged because I think the concern is that instead of having a study session 2 weeks in advance to understand what's coming so you can be prepared and think your way through it at the regular meeting, that it would get all crammed up into a single meeting. But the idea that there's a study session, a couple weeks passes, you're getting ready to go into a regular meeting, and you're thinking, wait, I've got 7 staff members sitting back there. Do we really want to drag them in and have them wait till 8 o'clock? Can I just run some questions by you because we're going to ask these questions? There's nothing that really prevents that other than your informal discouragement of that.
That's the Garrett rule.
I wasn't suggesting that all staff sit in the back and wait if we have questions. That would be even worse, I think. But just if, I read something on Friday, I want it pulled off. I talk to whoever gets to make that decision and say, I would like to pull this off. Can we put it on a study session for another time? I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah. Councilmember Olson.
I like the topic areas of 16 and 18, that it's avoiding surprises, which I don't see that as, oh, I got you. I hope nobody's coming in to pull a consent agenda as a, I got you kind of thing.
No.
It's the surprise to the staff of not being ready to answer the kind of question you might have. And that's why 18 is important in terms of saving time. I don't have any trouble pulling things off consent agenda, but it would be a whole lot more productive for everyone if the staff person who's going to have to answer to it knows what our question might be so they're ready to answer it. Because there have been times where they've said, I don't have that information here. It's something beyond what maybe they thought they would need to prepare for it. So to me, this whole 16 and 18 has to do with courtesy and the use of everyone's time well so that we make a great decision. And I think if we can come up with 5 to 6, 7 kind of categories under which we would say these probably could go, maybe be less than that, consent agenda, that would be, we'd have a little bit of a normative acceptance of it, and then the rest goes on. To me, this is about courtesy, and it's not. We all call the city manager anyway if we have a question about something, and I don't tell you all. I mean, because usually it's not. I might ask them something about my area in this house, and then I'll say, okay, put it on a council request then. So, to me, it's about just courtesy to our staff and letting them know what we're going to do so it doesn't take them by surprise. They can be at their best. I'm thinking, how do we make them be at their best? This is the way we do it. Let people know ahead of time. If you haven't read it until 4 o'clock on Monday afternoon, fine. Our lives get busy. But maybe whispering is here. Hey, I'm going to pull this one. Can you make sure the person, I don't know. It just seems courtesy for me.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Bernstein.
I think it's dangerous for us to start having in-depth conversations about whether we're going to pull something or not here. Letting somebody know that we are going to pull something is one thing. I agree with Councilmember Quest. I want that discussion to happen in public, and I believe that the staff is prepared. I don't think having a discussion on an issue is courtesy or not courtesy, and I believe that our staff is prepared when they present us with something. So I think it starts to get dangerous to start having these conversations outside of that dais. And it's already on the agenda. If the public has looked at it and believes that there's some problem with it, then going forward, and there has been in the past, quite honestly, a lot of angst from the public going, what are they passing? It's just 9A through, 20D. I've been to other council meetings where they at least read, at least by title, each consent agenda so that the public is aware of what's being voted on. And I think that's courtesy to the public that's there, at least to say what you're passing by title, not to read the entire thing, but at least by title what's being passed. But I get concerned when we start having all these side conversations about stuff that's on an agenda item, and all we're doing is having a conversation and discussion about it. And we've even gotten to the point where I think it's been a little easier to just go, I have a couple of clarification points. Maybe I don't want to pull it because it's like bad to pull it or something. But it ends up being the same thing where you're just asking the question and finding out what's going on. So I really don't think we're blindsiding staff or being discourteous to them to have a public discussion about an issue.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions about the two consent agenda, items 16 and 18? Do you have enough information for those two?
I think I've got enough to say that we need some clarification on the consent agenda policy.
Okay.
Perhaps the categories are unclear, but at least defining it somewhere in here.
Okay, so what I would like to do, I would like to take a break.
Yes.
And then come back and finish this up.
Okay.
And so we will take a 7-minute break.
7 minutes.
Well, that puts us at quarter after.
Gotcha. So specific.
I'm fine. How are you, Doug? Oh, doing pretty well. God, I don't stand up well, but I'm we need to actually. Yeah, I'm sure.
Some people are bringing questions on the chair.
And don't rust into your chair.
It could be a little nicer. Hey, Doug. Doug? Why don't we just switch chairs with them? Oh. And then they'll see how nice and comfortable those are. It'd be easier to get through.
I like your thinking. Dan has got the answer. You trade the hard chairs for the soft ones around the table, and then you guys will know this is how much you feel.
Just do it for a couple hours. I'm sure you will get the idea.
Looking at policy for this evening.
You don't even see the lights.
First, I saw the flashing lights. I thought, that's kind of sharp. Does it need to really dark things up a bit?
That's a big issue with the emergency management thing. Working with members. Is like that?
It is, actually, it stipulates exactly what's in there. I mean, they provide some hazmat, they provide us with hazard materials response, and they're out here all the time. I mean, matter of fact, we had some sort of leak over here at one of our manufacturers where something blew up next to the kiln.
I don't have my reading that. I was just reading your name.
Line up with something coming out that blew up.
But what's your special something like that?
No.
Manager first.
Definitely have some major things going on.
Yeah.
And then we have some similar or connections.
Yeah.
They have all the people put contact on all there.
Yeah, I mean, because they're still under contract to provide some place that just make it like, so that's for here as well.
I mean, I'm exaggerating.
We have
They're perfect to get our hotspot
stations here. Yeah, I mean, the thing
Really
is that
important,
we
like,
have
throw
one
a lot
part,
of
we still respond. People talking about resources, and everybody's going over again, the same thing. Whether it's money, or chemical, or tornado, or turn a lot of hazardous systems. Then they have to go out there on that. This rail line, heavy rail line, had this.
I mean, the drug house through
Yeah, every overlay and we're around everywhere. There's always, we've got coverage in place. The bigger issue for us really is being prepared to have our emergency operations plan done, as well as our continuity of operations.
Guys, I still says,
And how are we going to do this? Step up and get our graph is starting holidays, that's our emergency services. In that role, we've got to go from there.
pretty impressed.
Now, it's a good point. I mean, the difficult nature is, I'm sure you typically your would step in. We're still part of the urban area services, USC, and Denver is as well. What the issue is, Rappahannock County may deal with emergencies differently than the city of Denver. You want to maintain chair control, that's why I didn't talk to Denver about it. Obviously, we're holding beyond.
Yeah. I was paying for it even when Kaiser covered it, so.
I'll tell you what.
How often?
Okay.
Does he do the electrodes? No. Which is good. Those things drive me nuts, but they help with my shoulders.
I like to go and just deal with it. That's what I've been doing my entire life. And the headaches were getting too bad. I was just in too much pain. And he said, here's the deal. I'm going to keep coming back. Let's deal with the crisis. You're going to stand up tall on two legs and get your sacrum into place. And then let's figure out what's going on. So the reason I come back every week, actually it's my own choice. But every time I come back, he'll touch something else. And I'll realize I've been carrying pain all, and so like today, you know that big flat bone in your head? Yep. That thing is frozen. And he goes, it's been 6 weeks. Well, you're going to get there. So, anyway, that's great. I know, I just, I'm kind of on, a high about it because I'm having so much physical success.
That's great. So I felt when I was in the walking to the beach, I was carrying something on the arms. And there was half went like this, and there's probably this much difference. So I half fell on the cement, half fell. So I jammed this up across. There's no water. It probably just stands up and I have a little bit of a bird. So I've thought about going to therapy.
You just need you just need to make the appointment and go. It's also supporting the local business, but you have to do very good.
I was going to do the guy before a child, so I can coffee. And then I just did my
Absolutely.
but I just haven't.
I didn't deal with my shoulder issue. And there's a but anyway, the whole thing, well, no. I ended up with frozen shoulders. Honestly, I just damaged something, and I never dealt with this, so it just stuck together.
But now I'm
stayed
call
this way. Yeah, 'cause I ended up
If you all could take your seats, we will get started again.
Thank you so much. You bet. Linda, thank you so much for the tea. That did
Yeah,
help.
do you need any more?
No, it's pretty pepperminty. It's
I know,
lasting.
that one kind of is, especially if you leave it in the water. Oof, man, that was loud.
Okay, so we'll call this meeting back to order. Now remind me what you want. We want to talk about consent agenda a little bit more. What?
So what I got from that is that we will draft some type of policy to clarify the use of the consent agenda. What we probably need more clarification on if there are certain topics that the council would rather see on the consent agenda versus those that you'd rather see on the regular agenda. We would need to know that. Otherwise, we'll just proceed, I think, as we've been proceeding otherwise.
Okay. So if there's any comments on that, I mean, I finally have understood, I've understood this for a while now, that consent agenda are things that probably are going to pass without any controversy. And I had already figured that out, but sometimes things do come up that we don't realize. So is there any suggestions about policy and how to move forward with determining consent agenda, or do we just keep moving forward, trying to figure it out? Councilmember Wilson.
Well, could you bring back some best practices that you know from other places? I know that in the past, a lot of the consent agendas that I did earlier on were really just financial things that we'd already agreed, or they're part of the budget things that just, there were larger numbers that needed to come through us, and they just went, we never questioned them because they were part of maybe Public Works. We'd already decided that, just didn't come before us. So I don't know if you can come up with a list that you think other cities maybe use.
Yes, we can look at some other
to us.
examples and come up with something we think will
I
work.
just want to make this easier on you all. I do think that we do waste time a little bit, and it gets confusing to some people as to why, and it'd be good to maybe have lesser on consent agenda if we think we're not going to. Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate this conversation because I think it's been helpful in understanding where, some of us that have pulled consent agenda items, it's not because we don't necessarily understand. So I think this has been very helpful. Okay, so what about 17? This is just standard courtesy. Use this policy manual effectively and courteously. Learn to utilize rules as outlined in the procedures manual of the City Council whenever possible to help facilitate an orderly process. Assist each other in a positive manner when addressing correct order of procedure. I'm assuming I'm okay with that. Does it necessarily have to be in here? I mean, it explains it for where we're at.
Right.
Councilmember Olson.
I think it's always good to sort of set up some guidelines for what we consider to be courteous so we can hold ourselves accountable. I don't think there's any problem with it.
Okay.
We all have different standards of courtesy, obviously, so.
Absolutely. Any other comments on those? I mean, unless you just absolutely want something removed. Debate decorum. Debate occurs between and among city council, but should be limited to making a point or stating a position. Redundancy, grandstanding, and personal attacks will be addressed by the mayor as being out of order or inappropriate. City council will appoint a sergeant at arms to provide a friendly reminder of exceeding a reasonable time limit.
Is that the police officer?
Councilmember Martinez.
I think this one's important to leave in here. We have had some troubles with this. My question is, how will this sergeant at arms work, and what is a reasonable time limit?
Okay.
TBD.
Well, we'll probably talk about that.
If I might be able to jump in on that question,
Okay.
I believe that your time limits, or at least the number of times that a council member speaks, is governed in Bob's Rules of Order in your procedure manual, and the procedure manual essentially charges the mayor, your presiding officer, with controlling that. So I think we could probably, I'm looking over to make sure I'm not saying anything incorrectly, we could probably just change this language to reflect Bob's Rules of Order, and instead of there being a, quote, sergeant at arms, it would be the mayor, your presiding officer, that would be charged with controlling that.
Okay, and that's one of the notes that I have, decorum rules consistent with Bob's Rules of Order. Question mark. Councilmember Olson.
You were saying what I was thinking. I also, we've had times where some mayors have gone on and on, too. So it might be that one of the things that's missing from us right now, we don't have mayor pro tem and mayor that are both meeting with the city manager. So so we have to help one another with this. But I think in general, it could be that both the mayor pro tem and mayor help to monitor the timing of things and remind us when we've gone over.
Thank you. Any other comments on that? Councilmember Cuesta.
Reasonable time limit just seems in the eye of the beholder. I'm sure the person speaking thinks that they're being reasonable, and I'm sure that there might be others, moment to moment, who see it differently. So that's where I think it gets tough.
I think it gets tough, but I think in Bob's Rules of Order, it's 5 minutes. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay.
And if there's a fine time, that's I think that makes it more fair. Not that I expect anybody to have a stopwatch either, as we're speaking.
Okay, and I think sometimes too, trying to get everybody to comment, before another council member has had an opportunity to speak again, but sometimes you all don't request to speak. So anyway, all right. Any more comments? So Sergeant of Arms, that is what was in the previous language, correct? Does anybody want to address that?
No.
Okay. I mean, if this is something that we need to address, we can address that.
Language seems a little harsh, but it's hard to do that. Whatever works.
Bring in Sergeant Schultz for you.
Councilmember Olson.
It does come from a language period that's a little different than today, so it seems odd but even 20 years ago, everybody knew what that meant. It didn't mean anything negative. It might be a good thing at the beginning of every new sets of terms to just reestablish this, that who's going to be the sergeant of arm? Well, I think it makes sense to have the person who's leading the meetings, whoever's the mayor, and then when they agree with the mayor pro tem to check that person as well. But it's really just about having the conversation, which we haven't done for a long time.
Absolutely. And I really just like the fact that we're going through this because we really never went through this. So, okay, moving on to, and Sergeant of Arms, they do have that at the State House still. So let's move on to 20. Be gracious and respectful at all times. It is the responsibility of each city council member to display common courtesies at all times. For example, avoid interruptions, avoid personalizing the issue, avoid grandstanding, avoid argumentative behavior, including repetitive statements of a position, and avoid filibustering. Isn't that redundant of one that's earlier? City Attorney Brown?
Probably. Honestly, there was so much redundancy in this existing council policy that it made it impossible for you to use. So, as you can tell from the red line version, I chopped and chopped and chopped. I did not want to chop to the point that I thought that I was developing your policy, because this is not about me, it's about what's comfortable for you as a body. So I probably erred on leaving some things in that were still considered repetitive. If you want us to double check that, I'd be happy to. I think now that it's been a couple months since I've done this last draft, I'll look at it with fresher eyes.
And so maybe, I think some of it is in 19, so maybe 19 and 20 could be combined together. Is that what you were going to say?
Yep.
Okay. Verse 21, or not verse 21, number 21, it's late. Remain silent, do not speak without being recognized by the chair. 22, focus on the issue, not on the member presenting the issue. And actually, all of these are just from the other policy manual. Treat each other and each person coming before city council with respect. 24, listen and understand before judging and making a commitment. 25, take time to negotiate. As a seven-member board, things work best through consensus or compromise. 26, respect differences of opinions and perspectives. 27, personal problems or concerns with individual council members should be discussed directly with that individual outside of an open meeting and not aired in a public forum. 28, work together as a team on issues as they relate to what's best for the city as a whole. Actually, if all of these are put in here, will that, City Attorney Brown, help go through the code and eliminate things in the code?
I'm going to bring back an ordinance to you updating Chapter 1 of the code after you've adopted this policy manual. So So I'll make sure that whatever I bring back, because when we change the code, it's an ordinance change. So I don't want that to be anything that you'll have to revisit very often.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments about this? If not, we'll go back to Mr. Woulf.
All right. Rules of decorum are set. Moving on to next item this evening that was requested for additional discussion is packet printing and delivery. Not revisiting the entire discretionary funds issue. We spent some time on that. One of the issues that was decided, I believe there was consensus on March 12th to include packet printing as an allowable expense separate from discretionary funds, so not charged against the council discretionary funds. The one issue that was not discussed, though, is the issue of packet delivery of the printed packet. In the current draft manual, the delivery of the packet would be charged to the discretionary fund, so that's one item that we wanted to clarify as to whether or not that is the preferred policy going forward.
Can I ask a question? Where is delivery of the packet charged in the current budget? Is it from discretionary funds?
No.
I don't believe so. I think it's part of IT general operations.
Yep, it's charged to it is charged to IT, and Mr. McKee who delivers that. Any overtime goes to the IT budget.
Okay. If we get the packet done earlier in the day, does that become less of a problem?
It could. Yeah, we could mitigate that. You're correct if we had it done earlier in the day.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
I was just going to ask, I feel like, well, I believe maybe a year ago or something, we had a council request information on about how much time and money it costs for the packet delivery. Anyone else remember that? Mm-hmm. Can we get some updated information on that? Because I remember it being really high, but maybe I'm not remembering it correctly.
I'm not sure, but we could get that information.
Do you remember?
And I think the request at that time was
It
more...
was a long time ago.
Yeah, was not only the delivery.
There
I think
was additional information in there too. I think
Right.
it had to include like the paper and all the materials to print it. But if we may treat delivery separately, it might be good to get an idea of what that cost is.
Okay, and I think part of the reason we didn't get to this is the night we stopped where we did, it was getting late. Otherwise, we probably would have moved forward with this also. Councilmember Barentine.
Obviously, when all of this was written, everybody got a paper packet. So it was never included in the discretionary fund nor considered to be part of the discretionary fund, just part of doing business. A paper packet has to be printed for the record, and so there is one. It is the addition of just doing however many other packets are necessary for council members requesting them. So the formation of a paper packet has to happen anyway. So the cost that is ensued to do that is part of the doing the business of the city. So the only additional cost would be then Assistant City Manager Woulf would be then the paper to hit print for the other two. The putting the materials together and the printing of at least one has to happen for the city, and so any additional. So it really is kind of minimal. I think what was included in the time was all of the time in putting together the packet, which has to happen anyway, and that has to happen whether we're putting it online or whatever. There's a lot of work in doing the business of the city that, I think was maybe inappropriately put in there at the time. So I would like to see that it still get delivered. I don't think that that's that big of a deal if we're going to go ahead and still have the process. It seems nitpicky to sit there and start talking about having it delivered.
Councilmember Olson.
I wouldn't question having it delivered for people who need to have it delivered. I would like to know what we think the cost is currently. We're only doing 2, right?
We actually have
Right.
that cost. It's $268 for 6-mile round trip. cost for the city.
Per period, which,
For packet delivery?
Yeah. No.
per person?
Per month?
No.
280 miles.
No. $268 for the year to make the.
For a year?
Per person?
No.
Or the whole thing?
The whole thing.
Oh, gosh, that's minimal.
6 miles round trip. I just pulled this from the last council request, and that information hasn't changed.
That's the travel amount.
Correct.
Travel time.
And then
Yep.
whatever other stuff, I do remember the request, it didn't faze me like any, I just figured it's expensive. But when you're doing overtime, it always adds up.
Yep.
And
So,
so that is also the goal to get it done earlier. I mean, I think the city clerk has been working on that also, so that the person that delivers the packets doesn't have to stay overtime in order to do it. So, Councilmember Cuesta?
Let's get the packets to everybody who needs them delivered. But Eric, if I may, it's only $268 annually to deliver a packet once a week to 3 different people?
That's the cost of transportation. It's not the overtime cost. That's just
So
the transportation
just
cost.
in like the mileage,
Yes.
like the gas expense.
Yep. The city is a little bit, uses a minivan. That's the cost.
And so do you charge 31 cents a mile, or what is it?
No, that cost actually came from our service center. They figured out what the cost of that particular vehicle is, and the miles that are entailed to do the 6 mile round trip to deliver the packet.
But it's not round trip. They usually do it on their way home, or they used to.
Gotcha.
point of information. So 3 people get them, and it's $268 for 3 people?
No, it was two people.
So, but someone
The
said it was
city-
3?
The city makes a packet. We don't deliver that. Obviously, it stays
Okay,
here.
so only 2 are being delivered.
Correct.
But three are being made. That's different. That's 2 people, 268. Yeah, that's what I first thought. So when I
Yeah.
kept hearing, no, there's 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome, not Alice.
Wow, welcome in.
Okay. So do we have consensus?
The sergeant of arms is about ready to come get you now. That's what I was thinking. He gets up.
So do we have consensus on whether or not to take it out of discretionary funds?
It was never in discretionary funds. You mean to put it in?
Okay. Okay.
Just so I'm clear on the question, this is to put it into each council member's discretionary funds.
Your
How is that being
current,
phrased?
your current policy draft in front of you would take the delivery of the packet and charge it to the council discretionary fund. So the question is, if there's consensus to do what we currently do, you would have to, there'd have to be consensus to remove that language.
Okay.
Your current draft in front of you. I know. You don't do that now. So if you want to continue to do what you do now, then we have to know that.
So do we want to continue what we're doing now? Councilmember
I'm
Wilson.
fine with it.
Okay,
If people need a hard copy packet, I don't have trouble with that.
Okay, thank you.
Consent. Yep,
Fine with
let's
me.
get everybody a packet.
Okay, so the way it is
All right.
now.
Moving on to the role of a council liaison as it relates to boards and commissions. This is not currently addressed in your policy manual. We have spent some time on boards and commissions policy, at least as it relates to how agenda items kind of move back and forth, or policy issues move back and forth between boards and commissions. We did not discuss, or at least reach some type of consensus on council liaison. This is separate from how we'll treat individual boards and commissions and the entire boards and commissions policy manual, which memorializes a lot of what we covered in the training. That we're still working on, and as soon as we have a final draft of that, which will be based somewhat off of what you put in the council policy manual, will be brought back at a future study session. For now, the only thing that I think is lingering out there that we need some direction on is the role of a council liaison. So, suggested language here, if the role of the council liaison is not defined in charter or ordinance, there would be clarification in your policy manual to say that council liaisons are non-voting, that they are able to participate in the meetings subject to Bob's Rules of Order, that council liaisons would be tasked with providing updates to the body on boards and commission business, and then additionally tasked with requesting agenda items on behalf of the boards and commissions. So we'd make sure that's in line with previous discussions. That's just clarifying that if a Board of Commission wanted to present something to the council, that instead of the chairperson feeling that they had to go directly to the mayor or directly to the city manager, that it would be the role of the council liaison. Now, that doesn't cover every instance. I don't believe all of the boards and commissions have a council liaison, so you'd have to provide direction specifically to those boards or commissions. But this is to clarify for those boards or commissions that have council liaisons that do not have a defined role.
Any questions or comments? I mean, the only question that and I'm assuming unless it's otherwise defined by charter or ordinance, 2 of the boards that I'm on, the Water and Sewer Board and the Malley Center Trust Fund Board, the council member is a voting member. And so that's defined.
Those are not council liaisons. Those are members of the board.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Olson.
I'm aware of those too, and thinking, is there a way to make those clearer in this, or should we, in order to make that? Because I remember when I was on the Water and Sewer Board, someone new came on who was used to being on another board and commission where they were, the voting, you didn't vote as council, and they were like really upset that I was voting. Like I was new, I didn't even know what I was supposed to be doing. But would that be helpful here, or where? Or is it just in the board and commission that we make that clear, and it's already clear there in the charter?
That information is pulled out of either the code or the charter. So we could include here reference to the code and charter sections, which makes a council member a member of the board, which is a very different concept than being a liaison.
Right. Maybe this would be council liaisons are non-voting except in boards and boards in which they are voting.
Well, I don't think you change the current language because a liaison is not a member of the board. But I do think underneath that you can say charter this member of board, so that people are aware of what those are. If you'd like, that's an easy update.
Any thoughts? We don't have to do
Probably
that.
doesn't need it to. Yeah, if we all know. I'm just thinking there are some people that read these things and don't read all of it, so they might read this but not the other. And
We do have in our draft version of the boards and commissions policy manual a chart in the back that defines some of those general requirements or governing ordinances or charter. That we could certainly provide when we bring that forward, just so there is somewhere where you can see that a little bit more clearly.
great.
Okay. Do we want to go through this right quick, because then we're finished, right?
Let's do it.
Almost there.
Okay.
Hi, Cheryl.
All right, so I'm hearing this is all right to memorialize. So request for review of CORA policy. So I think the question is whether or not to include some type of reference to the CORA policy in your policy manual or not. Here is our current CORA policy. I say this with a caveat that my understanding is that we are working on an update, a refresh of our current CORA policy. But just so you all know, this is the language now. This is not every item in our policy, but it gives you the gist of what we follow. Obviously, the official custodian is the city clerk. If we receive an open records request, the member that whether it's staff or the council member is responsible for responding to that. However, we forward everything through the city clerk's office so that there's a clear record of those requests. We have 3 working days to respond to that request unless there's extenuating circumstances. For example, if we receive a multitude of CORA requests at one time, that may be one of those circumstances where that's extended by 7 working days, so a total of 10. Fees are an important part of CORA. Many members of the public aren't aware of this. So essentially, my understanding, and anybody else can interrupt if I'm not accurate on this, there's other experts in the room. First hour is free, essentially. After that, there is a charge for staff, for research of that, any other fees associated with printing documents. It's not so much an issue anymore, so the big cost tends to be staff time. And if it does require staff time, we are required to provide an estimate and ask for 50% of that fee up front. And just a note that if somebody has made previous requests and is not paid for those for that research time, we do ask for full payment of previous requests before fulfilling the current or future requests. So that's generally the policy that we follow. I know this has been an issue in recent weeks, so just wanted to bring this forward and clarify whether or not council would like this to be included in their policy manual or treated separately.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This might even be more a point of information. I think CORE is tremendously valuable, and citizens should have the ability to review records of any level of government. I've put in a few myself, and during my time with the state, we would receive them often. And truth be told, it often exceeded even 7 days. And I noticed we have the 3 working days, which I think sometimes is a quick turnaround for staff. Are we drawing that from state statute, or is that just a policy that we've adopted ourselves? The 3 working days extended to 7 under extenuating circumstances.
That is the way state statute reads.
I think they go to extenuating circumstances pretty quickly at the state between between us at the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions about that? Okay. Mr. Woulf?
All right. So the requested action is an idea of when you'd like this back for official adoption by motion. I think the question is, just to try to summarize very quickly, is we have a lot of edits to make. We've made a lot of edits. We're currently in the process. We have to take some edits from this evening and put it into a final draft. Would you like to see a final draft at a study session and discuss the final draft at a study session, or would you like the final draft to be brought forth for a motion at a regular meeting?
Okay. Do we have feedback on that? Councilmember Olson?
I could go either way as long as we have enough time set up in the regular meeting to do, because I think we did ask you to reword several things, so maybe we'll need to discuss those again, but there were several. So if you don't want to have a crazy evening in there, maybe bring it back to study session. We quickly go over it and then go back, bring it back.
Sure.
Councilmember Martinez.
I just want to say the sooner the better, and thank you everybody for all the hard work on this. I know we've been talking about it since November, December, so we got through it. So excited.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Against my better judgment, I'm going to ask this question. We will do this every 2 years, right after following each election?
This is what I think, and this is my opinion, that it probably won't take us this long to go over it. I mean, it might. It depends on the change in council, but I think, I don't know, how long, Linda, before this has it taken place?
We have talked through some items, but we've never gone through like this. We all committed to different councils committed to reading through the whole thing so that we knew what we were supposed to do. But I remember reading it the first time thinking, redundancy, like, how did this come to be? But we've never gone through it like this, line by line. So my hunch is it wouldn't be for another 8 years.
I think it's on that note, I think a great deal of deliberation has gone into it. Many thanks to staff for putting all the work in. So I know there's some loose ends, but I'm going to be ready to vote probably at our earliest convenience.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Bernstein.
We were discussing things that were from 1984. It hasn't been gone through. And most of it wasn't being followed. And there's the reason that so much redundancy kept getting added onto it just to patchwork it, probably because they didn't know what was in it to begin with, and they just put things in there because at the moment they needed it and didn't even realize that maybe it was already in there. So there is a lot of redundancy and a lot of things that were actually against the charter and against the Robert's Rules of Order that we were supposed to, council was supposed to be following. So I appreciate that we went through this process, and quite honestly, to go through these kind of things in that short period of time is actually pretty good. So I appreciate all of the work that the city attorney did with this and to clean this up a little bit. If it isn't, it's hard enough to follow, and it's impossible to follow if it isn't clear. And it's never going to happen if nobody reads it. So those three things have at least happened now, and so we have some, I think, a good foundation. So I don't think that we need to go through it, except to make sure that the councils, every new council, make sure that they at least have some, I think what Councilmember Olson brought up before about making sure that it's, this is what we go by, here's who the person who is considered the sergeant at arms, here's who runs the meeting, so that there's some quick synopsis of it. And most importantly, that people understand, to read the charter, just like what we did with the boards and commissions, that everybody's getting on board with where their foundation comes from. And so that we don't have some poor council person going on the water and sewer board and not knowing what their role is, so that those boards know to bring those new members on that way. And I think this council ought to do that as well. But hopefully we don't have to spend this amount of time every 2 years. That would be 5 months, 6 months every 2 years. That's too much.
Thank you. Councilmember Olson.
I wanted to refine my comment about whether this comes a regular session or study. I would jump on, if I am hearing you right, Councilmember Cuesta, if you would be fine doing it in there and have that conversation. I'd rather it be sooner than later so we can move on too. So I don't need it to come back to study session unless the rest of us think it's going to take too much to discuss it and then we disrupt a regular meeting. So I'm fine with it just going straight in there.
Great. Thank you.
I would also prefer to have it go straight to there. I think we've talked enough about it, and I'm ready to move forward.
All right. And Councilmember Bernstein?
No, I agreed with Councilmember Olson when she stated before that a lot has been changed, a lot has been reworded, and we really need to spend the time making sure that we have an opportunity to know that it's worded the way we thought. In all fairness to our assistant city manager on how we were putting things together here, it's not like we all took notes. He took notes and said, here's how I'm going to word it. So I would like to make sure that we have the kind of time. I agreed with the way her stand was originally, that we need to at least make sure that even if it's a brief period of time, that we have it on a study session before it goes.
Actually, I think that might be a good idea, is to bring it forth maybe even on a study session before a council meeting, and then council would have time to look at it and just go over any changes that we need to, and then it could come up at that. And this is by resolution, correct?
Yeah, it's by regular motion. Yeah, it would be by regular motion. And the only issue is you have an informal rule that doesn't let you discuss a matter on the same day that you're going to council. Again, that's informal, and whether or not you're even going to keep those informal rules was a discussion from months ago, and I don't remember the outcome.
Yes, they're informal rules until you adopt your motion, and then they're formal rules. So it's up to you. It's up to the body.
Councilmember Olson.
Well, I think if we think people are not going to want to vote in there because they are going to want another day or something, then I'm fine with it being on a study session. I thought that Member Cuesta was suggesting that, and I didn't hear any rebuttal to I said either way. I just didn't want to have it throw our regular meeting off. So, I thought people were saying, yeah, let's go in there, so I was just confirming. So I don't care which way, really.
So perhaps we schedule a really short amount of time on a study session, allow you to have it in advance, a week in advance of a regular meeting where we plan to bring forth a motion, and just give you a chance to digest it so that we don't go back and forth.
I think that's, if everyone's okay with that, I think maybe we should do that. And I mean, there may be no changes. Everybody will read it at the study session and say, hey, it's great. And then it just would come forward at the next meeting.
We can do that.
Okay. Moving on to the final agenda item is the fiscal year 2019 budget presentation. We don't really have a whole lot of time if we want to get done early. Or are there, and this is City Manager Eric Keck. Are there things that we could discuss this evening that would help facilitate this?
Good question, Mayor. Actually, I think that what we're starting to see is that I think the May 5th meeting of the council for the special meeting that you're going to have to do strategy will really inform and discuss or touch a lot of these areas. I appreciate the extra questions that have been sent to me. I have received some emails from Member Cuesta as well as a Member Wink who had some additional questions, and I think those questions are going to be woven into that strategy as well as specifically discussed as part of the budget formulation. And those questions are really, some of them are really granular in nature, like how much would an extra code enforcement officer cost, or just some policy level questions on how things are done, which we appreciate. So honestly, Mayor, I don't think you're going to get started tonight and finish with any of these policy questions, but I think it'd probably be best just to wrap up tonight and focus our time there, and we'll take that information that we're gleaned from the strategy and come back and jump right back into the budget in May.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I do believe like you said, some of the strategy discussion is going to answer some of these questions.
It will.
So, okay, moving on to council members' choice.
Can I ask a question about this
Yes.
last? Is our goal for our time together on the 5th related to this? Is it to come up with a similar document that we did with the strategic plan that we had for 2017 to 2019, the one that was beautifully laid out with? Is that similar to what we are trying to do with answering these questions? Because I think I got confused about this.
Yeah, let me explain this if I can, in as simply as I can. The strategic plan, really, we've been putting the cart before the horse. What we've been talking about with these questions really is tactical in nature or operational in nature. These questions help to inform staff on how to formulate the budget. So if we look at things from a pyramid, typically what we would have would be some massive transformative purpose for the city and why we exist. But we haven't touched that. We've been spending time down here at the operational level. We haven't. If we look at it from a aviation vernacular, aviation terminology, we're basically still on the runway. We haven't taken off. We've been dealing with operational levels down at the ground. The strategic plan really is not even the highest flight pattern. It's basically you've taken off and you're able to see where you're going and you can see the forms of the earth. But the strategy will look a lot similar to what you've just enunciated for the 2 years, 17 through 19. But I think it will also inform us on, with those priorities will then help us to shape where we're going to be putting our money towards as well. So I think you're onto something there.
So yeah, when I was spent quite a bit of time on it this weekend, and I did discuss it a bit with Councilmember Wink. Hope I didn't make her sick by talking to her about it. But so I got really, I do think we need that bigger thing, and we've got information from the forum that will feed that as well as ours. And I liked the format of the past document of the 17 to 19. Now this will be 19 to 21, right?
Correct.
So what would be helpful to me, I don't know if it would be for the rest, so I'm going to ask for the rest because it's going to be long. Those were really specific things that we were hoping for, and they were much, I mean, the sub-levels of the tactical goals were there. Is there a way to get sort of a return report on those? Because I think most of them are met. When I went through it several times, I thought, I think we've made progress on all of these, which I think is very encouraging.
Yes. The answer to that is yes.
I would think you would be able to do that and be able to say, wow, our staff team has done an amazing job. Council has pushed us in these directions. And if there is a financial piece on any of them, that we know we spent a certain amount of money in that area, that would be helpful. But I don't know how you can cross-reference all those. I don't know if
And
there's-
just to clarify, so that we used as really our organizational strategic plan, and so I think the council strategic plan would be even a bit broader than that. We didn't touch some of the policy items that we know would require council input and community input and review, and so I think it does go out a layer from where we were at. We spent time together as a director team on our own retreat in October, as you know, and at that retreat, we did go through our organizational strategic plan and start marking out where we've made progress and circle some ones where we really need to focus on. So we can provide that to you. I think that would be helpful to see, but we're hoping for a very similar document for the council to come out of this session.
Out of the fifth. So that's helpful, because then if I know where we're headed, I can be a little bit more helpful, because when I started answering these, I thought, but that depends on this.
Right.
But that depends on this.
And that's what I mentioned. I think what I was trying to do with you is to prep your mind to begin to help us, if you could, to forecast. But it was putting the cart before the horse, really, because really we need that strategy where you're actually telling us what's most important to you, because where your heart is, your treasure is there also. We want you to put your money towards those types of things as well. And so I think that will really help to inform us on many levels.
Thank you. I'm sorry to derail this a bit there.
No, you're fine.
Hopefully that's helpful to everyone else.
I think we can spend some time before you get into the fifth, just kind of reflecting on where we've been and what we do hope to get out of the fifth, at least in the similar guidance that we'll be giving the facilitator to say, here's what we hope to get out of it, and make sure that matches what you all hope to get out of the fifth.
Okay, and that, really, that is our next meeting, a public meeting is the 5th. So.
Unless you wanted to call a special meeting next week.
I don't think so.
So I'll be providing that to you via email.
Okay, thank you.
At a regular meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for that question, Councilmember Olson. Councilmember's choice. Who would like to go first? Councilmember Martinez.
Sure. I just have two quick things. I just wanted to say thank you to Councilmember Olson for covering for me at the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting. I was meeting with the business owner and wasn't able to make it, so she stepped in, and thank you. I appreciate that. Just want to report on the amazing turnout at the river cleanup event. It was coordinated by the wastewater treatment plant, the police department, and Keep Englewood Beautiful. We had over 90 volunteers. It was outrageously fantastic turnout. Lots of kids, families, big groups, collected all kinds of trash and recycle items from by the river. It was really great, and everyone was really excited, and most of the folks seemed to be from Englewood and Littleton, so it was really cool. So thanks again to all the wastewater treatment staff, Deb Parker and her whole team, and everyone. Tony Arnoldy was there, and Keep Englewood Beautiful members and all the volunteers. It was fantastic. Looking forward to it next year, too.
Great. Thank you for that report. Councilmember Cuesta?
I do not have much. I actually guess I owe Councilmember Olson a thanks as well. She covered for me at Parks maybe 2 weeks ago at this point, so thank you. I appreciate it. And just on a note, I was driving down Logan on Friday, and in between, I guess, Dartmouth and Yale, I saw signs for all three of the gentlemen running for the District 1 seat. And I always like democracy in action. It's good to see people who are out there and clearly knocking doors and getting signs out. So it'll be exciting to have a full council, and I think it's right around the corner here. So good for those guys.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wilson?
I have to say that it was really fun to go to both of those meetings, which I said last week about the Parks and Rec, but you were not there. But the Transportation Committee, oh my goodness, that is such a great group of people. I just had a wonderful time listening to them, the way they were approaching, thinking about the way we travel, the way we walk. I think it's going to be a great group, and they want to meet regularly, which that group hasn't met, but quarterly a lot in the last year or two. So very excited for that. I don't think I have anything else worth spending any time on.
Okay.
Have a great week off.
All right. Yes. Thank you. Councilmember Bernstein?
The Englewood Housing Authority meeting, they did provide a copy of the Traditions contract that allowed them to be tax exempt. It came up at the meeting previous to that they had no idea how many Section 8 people were in there, what the process or procedures were for handling any of the Section 8 people wasn't in the contract, that there was no oversight by that board. There isn't any oversight or accountability provided in that contract, so it's some concern, and I think now to that board that they're giving these tax exemptions to these properties, the Foundry, Medici, the Delaware property, Traditions, and there's no oversight to whether that's being kept or not. And so they may be looking at exactly what the requirements are of the contract that allow somebody to get a tax exemption. And once we, the taxpayers are providing that, are the Section 8 people being handled with a process and procedure that's within the law, and whose oversight, and hopefully they'll be looking at that. We don't want to give away that kind of huge taxpayer money if they have no Section 8. I mean, apparently the contract only says that they will allow it, but everybody can allow Section 8. So doesn't mean everybody's house should be tax exempt. So I think they're looking at it a little closer for exactly the impact that it's had on the city. And I just use the Traditions contract as an example. And we'll get the others. I assume that they're all somewhat similar. This arose out of an eviction process that was happening at Traditions. I'm very grateful that that woman was not evicted, but we didn't get involved in that woman individually, but it was just the circumstance of her issue that had come to light that came up. So I don't know particularly what happened, whether they followed procedure or not, but it was the catalyst for it, and then I just heard she wasn't evicted, so that was a nice thing. And then I attended the code enforcement meeting. There is a new chair. I was grateful to see the kind of process that they're going through, and I think that our mayor does a beautiful job as the liaison there, and I'm glad to see that they're kind of moving forward the way that I think the charter kind of intended them to be. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of that as they flesh that out. So nice job, Mayor.
Thank you. And I actually just want to give an update on the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee. I think that group is doing an amazing job, and they're moving forward. And they didn't talk about potbelly pigs. We talked about chickens for quite a while, and I think that there was a level of frustration on that board. But all of a sudden, they just have this this new vision. I want to thank the city attorney for rewriting the bylaws, and there just have been a lot of things going on in the city that I think are really positive in the area of helping boards and commissions, and also helping us as liaisons. And I want to thank all of you for working so hard together on this policy thing. I know this policy manual, I know there were days that we thought we'd never get to this point. So I just thank you for the great discussion that we have had, and I thank the city staff for all the hard work that they've done on that. It's come to my attention that Katie Sullivan is going to be doing a community policing. I don't know if it's a seminar or it's with the police department, and people have to RSVP. I'm wondering if it might be a good idea for Chief Collins and Katie Sullivan to come to City Council and talk to us about community policing. I went to one of those things. It probably was at least 2 years ago. I don't remember if it was before I got on council or after, but I think if this is what's going out to the citizens, that it would be good for council to have that information also.
Okay.
Are you talking prior to that meeting? When is that?
Well, I don't know when that meeting's fairly soon.
It is.
So I think that they've been
If I
having-
may, I echo that on a regular basis, that before we have things go out to the community like that, that we know what they're telling the community. The presentation is probably a good idea.
Okay, thank you. City Manager's report.
I've got two topics. I need to take a leave of absence in early May. My parents have sold their property, their farm in Ohio, and need some help packing it up. So I'll be here May 5th. I'll be here for the meeting on the 7th, but I'll leave, I think, either late Tuesday or that Wednesday and be gone the rest of the week so I can help them pack up. Also want to discuss with the council, we've obviously gone out and had a recruitment process for a public works director. This process has been somewhat painful for us as we're still trying to get over the fact that Dave Henderson's no longer with us. But I will say that we did have great interest. We had several qualified candidates come forward after some exhaustive interviews with not only some directors, some managers, as well as employees of the Public Works Department. We have made a selection and an appointment, and a woman named Maria DeAndrea has accepted the position. She will start with us on June 4th, which sounds like it's millions of years away, but it's really coming quite quickly. But you'll get the opportunity to meet Ms. DeAndrea probably right away because there's a lot of initiatives that are coming forward that are Public Works related. I do want to publicly thank Larry Nimmo for stepping up. He really did a great job of providing stability to the department at the time, as well as his passion for projects has been really appreciated. And he will continue to actually serve in the acting role, obviously, until Ms. DeAndrea arrives, but also continue to manage the police building project, which Mr. Henderson started. But he's doing a great job right now with managing that. But I wanted to let the council know that we do have a new member who's going to be joining the team, and she'll be here in June.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you. City Attorney.
No report.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.